Hey everyone, What If Fan here, bringing you another exciting part of What If Transmigrated in Bleach World. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name on my Patreon page. Make sure to check it out and show them some love. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Quick update. What If Reborn as Gohan in future timeline is now on hold, since we've caught up with the author. So now, I need your help picking the next project for the channel. I'm currently deciding between these three fanfics. What if Transmigrated in One Piece and becoming a Marine? What if Ichigo awoke his powers to save his mother? What if Transmigrated into a nightmare mode Dragon Ball world? Please vote in the poll and let me know which story you'd like to see next. I'll take the top pick and start working on that as the series next. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 61, Your Device Has His Flavor, Hueco Mundo Arrancar. Kanazawa, you did a great job. Uehara Shiroa praised Hotaru Kanazawa with a satisfied smile. He was well aware that the so-called assessment accident had been orchestrated by none other than that old fox, Aizen. His real objective? To subtly manipulate Hinamori Momo, Kiraizuru, and Abariranji, those three naive fools, by exploiting their emotions. In the original timeline, Hotaru Kanazawa had unfortunately been one of the countless victims caught in Aizen's web of deception. But with Uehara Shiroa's intervention, the plot had already veered off course. Now, the court army had gained a diligent and capable squad leader. For most Shinigami, Rokangai was nothing more than a slum, a place where the so-called untouchables lived, with no future or glory to be found in guarding its districts. However, Hotaru Kanazawa took her duties seriously. She never slacked off, showing unwavering dedication to her post. Uehara Shiroa couldn't help but admire her work ethic. Sure enough, the three Rokangai districts under her command were far more stable and well-managed than the others. After leaving Rokangai, Uehara Shiroa and Ayasunano made their way back to the court army's headquarters in Siriidii. Their residence was located in a luxurious sector, not far from the offices of the Gotei 13 captains. As they passed by the 5th Division's office, Uehara Shiroa instinctively glanced in its direction. Standing there, dressed in his pristine white haori, was Aizen, his usual warm and composed smile in place. He gave them a polite nod. Uehara Shiroa responded with a casual nod in return. Behind him, Ayasunano, who was holding a book close to her chest, also noticed Aizen. Unlike Shiroa, she maintained proper decorum, offering the 5th Division captain a respectful salute before quickly following after her superior. Uehara Shiroa, however, merely curled his lips in amusement as a thought crossed his mind. So, that sly bastard has already taken notice of me, huh? It didn't bother him in the slightest. He had never intended to hide his presence entirely. If anything, playing along with their little game would be more entertaining. That Aizen just now? Pure illusion. In theory, only Shinigami who had fallen victim to Kyokusu Uegetsu's ability could perceive it. This was Aizen's subtle way of testing whether Uehara Shiroa was truly under its effect. But such tricks were useless against him. After all, trying to deceive him with illusions while he possessed the power of the mind gem was like trying to light a candle in the middle of a hurricane, utterly pointless. That's why, despite never having been affected by Kyokusu Uegetsu, he could still see through the illusion as easily as spotting a flaw in an amateur's lie. One glance. That was all it took. Turning away from Aizen's office, Uehara Shiroa shifted his attention to Ayasunano, who had been uncharacteristically quiet. He raised a brow before speaking. Still brooding over what happened in Rokangai? Nanayo hesitated for a moment before sighing. She knew her teacher was too sharp to miss the thoughts troubling her. Right, she admitted, pressing her lips together. Honestly, I was relieved when I saw how much of a difference the court army has made. But even now, I can't believe how terrible those last few districts were. I never imagined such a cruel place could exist within Soul Society. Her voice was filled with frustration. I don't understand, how could Soul Society allow something like that to continue? Growing up, she had read countless books about history, politics, and law. But books never truly prepared one for the reality of things. The first time she had witnessed the horrors of Rukongai over a decade ago, it had shaken her to the core. Back then, she had desperately wanted to do something, anything, to change the appalling conditions. But no matter how hard she tried, she was powerless. Even her uncle, Kayaraka Shunsui, had been unable to help. He had bluntly told her that the political structure of Seoul society was far more complex than she understood, advising her to give up on trying to change it. Then came Uehara Shiroa. In just a few decisive moves, the commander of the court army had swept through Rukongai, purging the corrupt aristocrats and criminals that had long plagued the districts. In an instant, many of the problems that had persisted for centuries were simply gone. It was an overwhelming contrast. Because they don't care, Uehara Shiroa stated plainly. The truth was, he didn't particularly care either. But unlike those nobles, it wasn't because he lacked empathy, he simply viewed all beings as the same. Commoners, nobles, captains, criminals, to him, they were just people. Nothing more, nothing less. And that was precisely why he had become an honest judge in this rotten system, an impartial force capable of passing judgment without bias. Even in a world where corruption ran rampant, where justice was often a twisted concept, a ruthless judge who punished all wrongdoing equally could ironically be seen as the fairest of them all. Reality was often absurd like that. Ayase Nanao clenched her fists. But they knew it was wrong. And yet, aside from you, no one did anything. To her, it was infuriating. How could everyone, including her own uncle, simply accept such injustice without lifting a finger? You're mistaken, Uehara Shiroa corrected her with a shake of his head. It's not that they don't want to act. It's that they can't. Take Madarame, for example. On the surface, he looked like your typical hot-headed thug, but in reality, he had long since become disillusioned with Seoul society's system. Despite being from a noble family, even he recognized the absurdity of their government. At one point, he had been so disgusted by it all that he had even contemplated throwing his life away. Uehara Shiroa's evaluation? Incompetent. Powerless. Meaningless. So many Shinigami, whether it be in the Gotei 13, the Kido Corps, or the Onmatsukido, were skilled in destruction but had no ability to govern, build, or improve. They were Shinigamis, not leaders. That was the fundamental problem. After a moment of contemplation, Ayase Nanao let out a small sigh. The anger within her had cooled slightly, though it hadn't entirely faded. She suddenly thought of something and asked, "Are you heading to Hueco Mundo next?" "I am," Uehara Shiroa confirmed. "I plan to check in on Kuratsuchi Mayuri while I'm there." Of course, that was only part of the reason. More importantly, it had been a while since he last set foot in the Hueco Mundo territory. And frankly, his hands were itching to cut something. Ayase Nanao frowned slightly. "Should I accompany you, Commander?" "You? To Hueco Mundo?" Uehara Shiroa glanced at her, then smirked. "Nah. No need to follow me this time." While he had no doubt in her abilities, Hueco Mundo was no place for someone like Nanao. Besides, he had his own plans that didn't require unnecessary distractions. Understood. She nodded obediently, though her expression was filled with concern. "Commander, be careful." With that, she turned and headed toward the court army's main office. Uehara Shiroa opened the system prompt. "Congratulations. Daily task, territory patrol completed. Reward, spiritual pressure +1, universal barrier +1. In an instant, Uehara Shiroa felt a small but noticeable increase in his Ryatsu. His second-class spiritual power had strengthened slightly, and the universal barrier, which could block all attacks, became even sturdier. The daily task requirements were actually quite simple. He only needed to patrol a portion of his territory to complete it. Checking in on Hueco Mundo wasn't even necessary. Yet, watching the court army grow from nothing into a formidable force gave him a certain sense of accomplishment. It was more than just a tool for him, it was a way to subtly reshape parts of Seoul society that he found intolerable. Since he had already checked on Rukangai and Siriitii, he figured he might as well take a trip to Hueco Mundo as well. Soon, Uehara Shiroa arrived at the court army's underground base, hidden deep beneath Soul Society. The base was heavily fortified, layered with powerful barriers that ensured its secrecy. Unlike the dim, shadow-filled laboratories typical of the Gotii 13, this one was brightly illuminated, leaving not a single dark corner. Inside, Kuratsuchi Mayuri was leading a team of engineers from the Technology Development Bureau, busily working on upgrades to the Hueco Mundo Gate. As soon as Uehara Shiroa stepped into the room, the third seat of the 12th Division, Akon, immediately straightened his posture and gave a deep bow of respect. "Commander Uehara," he greeted. The other technicians quickly followed suit, lowering their heads in deference. Strictly speaking, as the deputy director of the Technology Development Bureau, Akon didn't need to show this level of courtesy to Uehara Shiroa. However, he understood the hierarchy well. Unlike his own captain, who acted without scruples and saw human life as nothing more than a tool for experimentation, Uehara Shiroa was on an entirely different level. Even disregarding his terrifying combat prowess, the sheer presence he commanded made him an intimidating figure. Compared to him, Kuratsuchi Mayuri almost seemed tame. Akon wasn't about to step out of line. Meanwhile, near the Hueco Mundo Gate, Mayuri Kuratsuchi, his masked face as eerie as ever, fixed his piercing gaze on Uehara Shiroa. His eyes flickered with suspicion. "I've finished recalibrating the system. This gate should now be far more stable than before," he stated coldly. "However, tell me, where exactly did this advanced equipment come from? I sense something distasteful about it." Uehara Shiroa shrugged, responding casually, "Oh, I just picked it up somewhere." Mayuri let out a sharp, irritated laugh. "Picked it up, you say? Are you seriously expecting me to believe that you just happened to stumble across technology that only that man had ever researched?" His skepticism was justified. Logically speaking, the Hueco Mundo Gate shouldn't have been sustainable for long. Its original designer had defected, leaving no one behind with the expertise to maintain or improve it. As a result, even supporting a single Hueco Mundo expedition had been pushing its limits. Yet, after that very expedition, Uehara Shiroa had somehow acquired the necessary technology to keep the gate operational. And now, he had even brought in highly advanced modifications. It was too convenient. There was definitely something suspicious about this. Uehara Shiroa, however, merely smirked. "Maybe I'm just lucky. They say handsome men have good fortune." "You." For a brief moment, Kuratsuchi Mayuri's fingers twitched, almost as if he were about to launch an attack on impulse. Rules? Regulations? He had never cared about such things. After all, he had served time on the maggot's nest and climbed his way back to power. Fear was not something he was familiar with. But then, a vivid mental image flashed through his mind. The beaten and bruised figures of Jin Ikamaru, Byakuya Kuchiki, and Zaraki Kenpachi, all lying in a miserable state after crossing Uehara Shiroa. He could still picture Zaraki Kenpachi in particular, impaled and swinging like a candied hawthorn skewer. Kuratsuchi Mayuri's anger instantly evaporated. With a frustrated scowl, he turned away and barked at his subordinates, "Akon, don't forget to prepare the research materials I requested. We're leaving." "Understood, Captain." Akon responded quickly, his voice filled with relief. He bowed once more to Uehara Shiroa before hurrying after Mayuri. That had been close. Akon had already decided that if the two had actually started fighting, he wouldn't just stand by and do nothing. Although he knew Uehara Shiroa was overwhelmingly stronger, he still owed a debt to his captain. If anything happened to Kuratsuchi Mayuri, someone had to inherit his position. Uehara Shiroa, on the other hand, barely paid any attention to Mayuri's outburst. In fact, that had been his plan all along, to provoke Kuratsuchi Mayuri just enough to make him compete with Urahara Kisuke. After all, competition was the greatest motivator. With both of them working harder to outdo one another, he could simply sit back and reap the rewards. Satisfied, Uehara Shiroa made his way toward the Hueco Mundo base. Upon arriving, he was greeted by a formidable sight. The court army soldiers stationed here were hardened shinigamis, each with a sharp, feral glint in their eyes. Their presence alone radiated aggression, like a pack of hungry wolves ready to tear apart their prey. Yet, the moment they laid eyes on him, their demeanor changed instantly. As if a switch had been flipped, they straightened up, their previous hostility vanishing like mist before the sun. In unison, they lowered their heads and saluted, their voices loud and filled with unwavering respect. "Greetings, Commander." Uehara Shiroa didn't acknowledge them. His gaze swept over the base briefly, but he didn't linger. Instead, he stepped beyond the barriers, walking out without a word. Anyone else might have been fooled by their obedient and disciplined behavior in his presence. But Uehara Shiroa knew better. These men were not ordinary soldiers. They were monsters, each one a former big-time criminal from the most dangerous districts of Rukongai. The 80th district and its neighboring areas were infamous for their brutality. No laws. No order. No morality. Only kill or be killed. In that kind of hell, only the strongest villains survived. Even the most minor disputes, whether over food, water, or a simple glance, could end in bloodshed. And yet, here they were. Uehara Shiroa had handpicked them, brought them to Hueco Mundo, and given them power. Why? Because waste should be put to good use. Instead of letting these ruthless killers continue their rampages in Rukongai, he had repurposed them into his own attack dogs. At the same time, this also helped balance the spiritual population between Soul Society and Hueco Mundo. After all, the court army had slaughtered countless hollows over the years. It was only fair to return the favor. A fitting exchange, wouldn't you say? This time, Uehara Shiroa had come to Hueco Mundo for a simple reason: he wanted to cut down a few hollows to unwind. Sparring with the likes of Ikemara Jin, Kochiki Byakuya, and Zaraki Kenpachi was entertaining, but ultimately limited. No matter how intense the battle, they were still comrades, killing them outright wasn't an option. And besides, some of his techniques weren't meant for public display. Hollows, on the other hand? No such restrictions applied. Slaughtering them was satisfying, unrestricted, and most importantly, useful for testing his recent power surge in actual combat. Of course, he had another reason for coming here. A hidden purpose. This was also a chance to deliver a subtle blow to Aizen. The cold, pale moonlight bathed the vast desert of Hueco Mundo. A land that had remained unchanged for tens of thousands of years. Even with Aizen's so-called beautification efforts, this realm was still as desolate and monotonous as ever. The same endless dunes. The same eerie silence. Nothing had truly changed. Releasing his Ryatsu, Uehara Shiroa quickly locked onto a target. Without hesitation, he executed a Shuunpa, vanishing from his position and reappearing as he cut through the wind, dashing across the desert at high speed. But just as he was about to reach his destination, he suddenly slowed. His expression remained neutral, but his sharp senses had already detected it. An abnormality in the space. A barrier. Still, Uehara Shiroa didn't stop. He continued forward, unfazed. And as expected, when he arrived, a powerful, invisible force field enveloped the area, subtly suppressing his spiritual energy. A familiar technique. So it's you again. Decades ago, when he had infiltrated Hueco Mundo to rescue Suifeng, he had encountered this exact type of barrier. A creation of Sailaporo Grands. And now, the suppression effect was even stronger than before. Clearly, the so-called scientist of Hueco Mundo had continued refining his craft. Yet, despite being trapped within the enhanced barrier, Uehara Shiroa showed no signs of concern. Not in the slightest. Lord Sailaporo was far too cautious, a voice sneered, echoing through the empty air. There was no need to go to such trouble just to deal with a mere ant. A figure flickered into view. A humanoid Arankar, clad in a pristine white shirt and matching pants, carrying an enormous blade across his back. His face was rugged, reminiscent of a Westerner, though a shattered hollow mask remained partially fused to his skin, leaving behind faint white fragments. Were it not for the traces of his hollow mask and the black void carved into his leg, the telltale hollow hole.
He could have easily been mistaken for a human.
The Arrancar grinned, flashing sharp teeth.
Don't you think so, Shinigami?
As he spoke, a crushing spiritual pressure erupted from his body. A suffocating, pitch-black Ryatsu so dense that it distorted the very air around them. In an instant, the barren desert seemed to darken, as if the world itself had lost its color. The ground trembled violently. Whirling sand and dust spiraled into chaotic patterns, twisting unnaturally beneath the influence of the oppressive energy. Even the towering rock formations quaked, some beginning to crack under the strain. The weak perished first. Several small hollows in the vicinity, unable to withstand the sheer force, disintegrated into spiritual particles, fading into nothingness. This Ryatsu, it wasn't just powerful. It was far above that of an ordinary Ajuchas, perhaps even stronger than the average Gotei 13 captain.
At the very least, 20 chakins in intensity. And yet, Uehara Shiroa didn't so much as blink. No reaction. No discomfort. Nothing. As if the Ryatsu meant nothing to him. Seeing this, the Arrancar narrowed his eyes in mild surprise. Even under suppression from the barrier, this man stood as if he felt nothing. Interesting. Feeling the rough, chaotic Ryatsu emanating from his opponent, Uehara Shiroa finally spoke, his voice calm. You're no ordinary hollow. His gaze remained steady as he analyzed the force exuding from his enemy. In your spiritual pressure, I can sense the power of a Shinigami. Then, his lips curled slightly. You're an Arrancar. It wasn't a question. He already knew. After all, Hueco Mundo had always harbored such creatures. He was merely confirming what was already obvious. The Arrancar tilted his head, intrigued. You can stay calm under my spiritual pressure, and you even recognized what I am, he nodded, seemingly satisfied. You're much stronger than the weaklings I've encountered before. His lips twisted into a grin. You're worthy enough to know my name. With a theatrical flourish, he straightened his posture. Listen carefully, Shinigami. My name is Jerome, a direct subordinate of Lord Sailaporo. Then, his eyes gleamed with amusement. And you? Who might you be? As a Vasto Lord-class Arrancar, Jerome was more than confident in his abilities. In the past, he had clashed with several Shinigami from the court army. None of them had impressed him. To him, they were nothing but weaklings, easy prey, easily crushed. But the man before him? He was different. Even with the barrier suppressing him, he remained composed. This was no ordinary opponent. Yet, the barrier is unnecessary. Jerome had absolute confidence in his own strength. He didn't need tricks or traps. He would crush the Shinigami head-on. Or so he believed. Uehara Shiroa met the Arrancar's gaze, his expression still unreadable. The commander-in-chief of the court army. His voice was calm. Steady. Uehara Shiroa. At that moment, Uehara Shiroa immediately assessed the situation. This Jerome, regardless of his rank or strength, was ultimately just another pawn. A disposable foot soldier. Whether in Las Noches or elsewhere in Hueco Mundo, beings like him were nothing more than cannon fodder. Chapter 62, Arrancar, just a training tool. Jerome immediately noticed Uehara Shiroa's undisguised disdain, and his expression darkened. A surge of irritation coursed through him, twisting his features into an enraged scowl. His voice turned cold as he spat out his words with contempt. It seems you still don't understand the power of an Arrancar, he sneered. Then allow me to enlighten you. The leader of trash is still trash. No matter how highly you think of yourself as the commander-in-chief of the Shinigami, in front of us Arrancars, you're nothing but a weak, lowly creature. However, Uehara Shiroa paid little attention to the enraged Arrancar before him. His spiritual awareness remained focused on his surroundings, stretching even beyond the immediate battlefield. The setup was too obvious, it reeked of a trap specifically aimed at him. With Sailaporo's cunning, he wouldn't settle for such a straightforward confrontation. There had to be more layers to this ambush.
And if Aizen was pulling the strings from the shadows, then there was no telling how deep the deception ran. As for the opponent before him, Uehara Shiroa had already seen through Jerome's strength. The Arrancar was hardly a major threat. His spiritual pressure was strong, but there was a lack of finesse, an imbalance in his energy. He was all brute force with no real refinement. A relic of outdated strength, struggling to fit into the evolving battlefield. Sure enough, under his continuous perception, Uehara Shiroha detected 3 distinct spiritual pressures lurking in the vicinity. They were concealed, but not enough to escape his notice. His lips curled in amusement. They really thought this would work? If he wanted to leave, these weaklings wouldn't be able to stop him. Not even Aizen himself could hold him down if he truly intended to escape. And these hidden enemies? Just rotten sweet potatoes and moldy eggs, nothing worth worrying about. But Jerome was quick to catch the disdain in his expression, and his anger flared even further. How dare a mere ant look down on an Arrancar, he bellowed, his voice echoing across the battlefield. Enraged, Jerome swung his massive right arm, launching 3 consecutive punches with all his might. Boom! 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 The sheer force of the strikes sent violent ripples through the air, creating shockwaves that tore through the landscape. Each impact produced a thunderous roar, the overlapping shockwaves amplifying into a devastating wave of destruction. The massive fist, brimming with terrifying spiritual pressure, bore down upon Uehara Shiroa like a tidal wave, distorting the very air around them. Even the Ryatsu in the atmosphere trembled, as if fearful of the impending disaster. And yet, Uehara Shiroa remained motionless. His feet were planted firmly on the ground, as if he had become an immovable object in the storm. The immense force pressing down on him failed to budge him even an inch. His spiritual pressure condensed beneath his feet, reinforcing his stance to the point of absolute stability. Then, as the shockwaves roared around him, he calmly raised his right hand and swatted Jerome's attack away. Bang! A deafening explosion, like a bolt of thunder splitting the heavens, reverberated through the Hueco Mundo desert. The sheer force of their clash flattened the surrounding sand dunes in an instant. Cracks spread across the battlefield like a spider web, massive fissures carving through the earth. The desert sands were thrown into the air, momentarily obscuring both fighters in a swirling storm of dust and debris. Yet Jerome merely grinned through the chaos. "What a fool," he cackled. "You think you can stop me so easily?" Destruction! With a triumphant roar, Jerome unleashed an overwhelming surge of destructive force, an energy so dense and violent that it warped the very air around them. The ground quaked beneath their feet, as if the heavens themselves were collapsing. The sheer magnitude of his power made the desert seem like it was on the verge of breaking apart. But as the dust settled, Jerome's laughter abruptly stopped. His eyes widened in disbelief. Uehara Shiroa stood in the same spot, untouched. Not a single wound marred his body. There wasn't even a speck of dust on his clothing. It was as if Jerome's supposedly invincible destructive force had amounted to nothing. A chill ran down the Arrancar's spine. This is impossible," he howled, his frustration mounting. "My destructive power is absolute. Die!" His body tensed as he took a deep breath, drawing upon the full extent of his strength. His spiritual energy surged to its peak, condensing into a lethal force that pulsed through his very being. At the same time, Jerome activated the unique ability of the Great Hollow Ring, his form splitting into countless afterimages that darted around Uehara Shiroa with incredible speed. A cacophony of explosions followed as he launched a relentless barrage of attacks. His fists, wreathed in the devastating energy of his signature ability, rained down like a violent storm. Dozens of strikes, each one capable of reducing the average Shinigami to nothingness. And yet, Uehara Shiroa blocked them all. With a single hand, he effortlessly countered Jerome's every move, parrying each devastating strike as if it were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. From the very beginning, Uehara Shiroa had already discerned the nature of his opponent's ability. Jerome's spiritual pressure functioned like a dormant volcano, its true power lay in the amplification of his destructive capabilities.
But to Uehara Shiroa, that hardly mattered. If anything, he saw Jerome as an ideal training dummy. It would be a waste not to use this opportunity to further refine his skills. Under the cold glow of Hueco Mundo's moon, the battle raged on. The two figures clashed repeatedly, shifting between ground and sky in the blink of an eye. Their movements left shockwaves in their wake, distorting the atmosphere with each collision. Wherever they passed, lesser hollows were annihilated, their very existence erased by the sheer force of battle. The earth trembled beneath them, as if recoiling from the devastation. Despite Jerome's relentless assault, Uehara Shiroa remained composed. His movements were precise, his counters effortless. With every passing second, he further perfected his mastery of Hakuta, his raw physical power reaching new heights. For the Shinigami, physical strength is not merely a trait, it is an extension of their abilities in spiritual pressure. As the saying goes, half the muscle strength means half the ability. A powerful physique enhances a Zanpakuto's lethality, making every strike deadlier. The reason why Kenpachi Zaraki's attacks are so terrifying is not solely because of his skill, but because his sheer muscle strength and endurance far surpass that of an ordinary warrior. Thus, for someone like Uehara Shiroa, a simple wave of his hand was enough to shatter the full force of Jerome's so-called destruction. As the battle raged on, Uehara Shiroa found himself growing increasingly relaxed. Every attack Jerome launched became easier to handle, his movements fluid, effortless, like water flowing seamlessly through a stream. There was no longer any need for excessive effort, his body responded with the grace of a seasoned warrior, every counter-strike executed with precision and elegance. Jerome, on the other hand, was reaching his limit. His breathing grew labored, and his strikes lost their force. He stared at Uehara Shiroa in disbelief. How is this possible? He had thrown every ounce of his strength into his attacks, yet this man had deflected them all using only a single hand. Was he the weak one here? Or, was this Shinigami's physique truly superior to his own? His mind reeled. As an Arrancar, he prided himself on his physical dominance. But now, standing before this Shinigami who seemed even more durable than himself, doubt not at his thoughts. Panting heavily, Jerome muttered to himself, his eyes full of shock. This defense, what is this? At first, he had assumed the Shinigami was using some kind of secret Kido technique or a specialized Zanpakuto ability to neutralize his attacks. But now, the truth was undeniable. Uehara Shiroa wasn't actively defending himself at all. He wasn't using any special tricks. He simply stood there and took the full force of Jerome's strongest moves, and remained completely unscathed. Not even a spiritual pressure barrier. No defensive technique. Just raw, terrifying resilience. Jerome's throat went dry. What kind of monster is this man? Yet Uehara Shiroa only let out a sigh, his expression filled with boredom. That's it? That's all you have? A fake was still a fake. His gaze flickered toward Jerome's Zanpakuto, which remained unused upon his shoulder. In that instant, the doubts in his heart cleared. So that was it. Arrancars were once hollows, but through the power of the Hogyoku, they had gained Shinigami-like traits. This transformation granted them intelligence and greater potential, allowing them to break the limits of their former selves and assume a humanoid form. However, an Arrancar's Zanpakuto wasn't the same as a Shinigami's. Rather than being a separate entity, it was an extension of their own power, sealing away their true hollow nature. While a Shinigami's Bankai released the full potential of their Zanpakuto, an Arrancar's Resurrection did the same by returning them to their original hollow form, unleashing all their latent power. Upon releasing Resurrection, an Arrancar's injuries would heal, their depleted stamina and spiritual pressure replenished. It was essentially a full restoration, akin to consuming a senzu bean. And yet, Jerome had not released his blade. He had not even attempted to. Uehara Shiroa narrowed his eyes. This Arrancar had no number. He didn't recognize Aizen's authority. So that was the truth. This so-called Vasto Lord-class Arrancar was nothing more than an incomplete product. A failed experiment, a hollow shell of what an Arrancar should be. Most likely, he was an artificial creation, a test subject born from Sailaporo Grand's and Aizen's experiments,
discarded once they lost interest.
A meaningless existence.
Jerome gritted his teeth in frustration. "Damn it," he spat, forcing his breath to steady. His eyes burned with defiance as he suddenly shouted, "Leo, do it!"
Uehara Shiroa instantly sensed a sharp murderous intent from behind.
A cold light flashed. A blade shot forward like lightning, aiming straight for his back.
He didn't move. He didn't even turn around. Clang!
The sound of metal striking an impenetrable surface rang through the battlefield. Sparks flew as the sharp blade scraped against his skin, failing to pierce through.
Jerome's triumphant smirk froze in an instant.
The shock in his expression deepened as realization struck him. Behind Uehara Shiroa, the figure of Leo, a tall, thin Arrancar wielding a spear, stood frozen, his attack rendered completely useless.
His eyes widened. What the hell?
Uehara Shiroa turned his head slightly, his gaze falling upon the would-be assassin.
Leo tensed under the scrutiny.
This Arrancar bore a fragmented white mask upon his forehead, and a hollow hole was carved into his right shoulder. His spiritual pressure felt similar to Jerome's, chaotic, unstable, and heavy, yet tinged with a Shinigami's presence. At first glance, he seemed strong.
But Uehara Shiroa already knew.
It was all for show. Leo gritted his teeth and pressed his spear forward, but it refused to move an inch. This was impossible. His strength and speed were unparalleled. His Zanpakuto was a spear precisely because it maximized his advantage in those areas.
This lightning-fast thrust should have been impossible to dodge, let alone block. And yet,
Uehara Shiroa had stopped it with nothing but his bare skin.
Cold sweat dripped down Leo's forehead. He exhaled sharply. What kind of defense is this? It's as strong as my own Hierro.
He didn't even feel ashamed for his failed sneak attack. After all, to the Hollows, victory was all that mattered.
Honor was meaningless. They would do whatever it took to win. But against this monster, even dirty tactics failed.
Uehara Shiroa's right hand suddenly reached out, gripping the tip of Leo's spear. His form blurred.
Leo's instincts screamed at him. He reacted instantly, withdrawing his Zanpakuto and retreating far away in a flash. However,
the moment his feet touched the ground, pain erupted from his chest.
He looked down.
A deep dent had been carved into his chest. His Hierro, the steel-hard skin of an Arrancar, had been pierced without him even realizing it. Blood dripped from the wound, staining the sands of Hueco Mundo. His breath hitched. His eyes darted to Jerome, who was equally stunned. At that moment, a new sound cut through the battlefield. A roar of wind and thunder. Two figures, one large, one small, descended rapidly from the sky, their spiritual pressure crashing like waves upon the desert.
Jerome's stunned face twisted into a relieved grin. Rodney. Cyril. Kill this Shinigami with me. The two Arrancars, one wielding a burning longsword and the other flapping massive bone wings, stared at the battlefield in confusion. Rodney frowned. What the hell is going on? Jerome, Leo, why is this Shinigami still alive? Cyril's eyes narrowed. And Leo, you're injured? 4 against 1. How could they possibly lose?
No matter how formidable a warrior was, enduring the combined might of 4 Arrancars at full power should have been impossible.
Cyril, the winged Arrancar with a savage expression, was the first to launch his assault. With a deafening roar, he lifted his golden warhammer high into the air and brought it crashing down toward Uehara Shiroa's head. Die, he bellowed. The sheer weight of the hammer carried a destructive force capable of shattering even the space around it. At the same time, Rodney took a more cunning approach.
Despite his confidence in their overwhelming numbers, he wasn't foolish enough to charge in recklessly. Instead, he maneuvered behind Uehara Shiroa in complete silence, his flaming longsword poised for a lethal thrust aimed directly at the Shinigami's skull. And then, there was Leo and Jerome, closing in from the sides with lethal intent. In a matter of seconds, Uehara Shiroa found himself surrounded. 4 Arrancars. 4 deadly strikes. 4 angles of attack.
Their combined assault was nothing short of cataclysmic. Their spiritual pressure surged into the heavens, thick and oppressive, blotting out the light of Hueco Mundo's eternal moon. The sheer intensity of their reiatsu distorted the air, warping the desert landscape beneath them. Against such an overwhelming attack, even a high-ranking captain-level Shinigami would struggle to survive. Escape would have been the wisest option. But Uehara Shiroa didn't move. His expression remained indifferent as Leo's spear, Rodney's flaming sword, and Cyril's golden hammer crashed down upon him. Boom! 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 A series of deafening explosions tore through the battlefield, sending shockwaves rippling across the desert. The sheer impact of the attacks shattered the sand dunes, creating massive craters where the strikes had landed. For a brief moment, silence fell over the battlefield. Then, a slow, creeping smirk spread across the Arrancars' faces. They had won. Even if their creator, Sailaporo Grands, had taken that many direct hits, he wouldn't have emerged unscathed. Not even Lord Aizen would brush it off completely without his Zanpakuto-S ability. There was no way a mere Shinigami, no matter how strong, could have survived that. Perhaps his head had been smashed into pulp. Perhaps his body had been obliterated beyond recognition. Perhaps. But then, the dust began to settle. And as the air cleared, Uehara Shiroa stood there. Untouched. His universal barrier and spiritual pressure defense had absorbed the full impact of their combined attack, rendering it completely useless. His pristine figure emerged from the smoke, not a single scratch upon his body. His uniform remained spotless, not even a speck of dust clinging to the fabric. And on his face was mockery. A casual, almost bored smirk, as if he had just endured nothing more than a light breeze. The color drained from the Arrancars' faces. Leo's jaw tensed. How is this possible? Rodney, the most level-headed of the group, felt his blood run cold. Even Cyril, who prided himself on his brute force, rubbed his eyes in disbelief. He looked down at the golden hammer in his hands, a weapon so heavy it could crush mountains, then back at Uehara Shiroa, who had taken the full force of its impact without flinching. Was this really a Shinigami? Or was he some kind of monster? Jerome, who had been battling Uehara Shiroa the longest, felt his mind unraveling. Everything he had once believed about strength, about hierarchy, about the superiority of the Arrancars, was being shattered before his very eyes. This isn't possible, Rodney finally whispered, his voice hollow. This guy isn't normal. Uehara Shiroa let out a soft sigh, stretching his arms lazily as if waking from a nap. Then, with an arched brow, he calmly asked, "Is that all?" He tilted his head slightly, his piercing gaze sweeping over the stunned Arrancars. "That was your best effort? Pathetic." A shiver ran through Leo's spine. "Move! Everyone, get back," he shouted. But it was too late. Before Leo could even finish his warning, Uehara Shiroa vanished. Whoosh! The four Arrancars' eyes widened in shock. He was gone. Their instincts screamed at them danger. Leo's heart dropped. Speed was his specialty. His movements were as fast as lightning, his technique allowing him to accelerate beyond normal perception. Among all the Arrancars present, he should have been the fastest. And yet, compared to Uehara Shiroa's instantaneous movement, his speed was child's play. The realization sent a chill through his bones. Rodney and Cyril barely had time to process what had happened before a roar of spiritual pressure erupted across the battlefield. A golden pillar of Reiatsu shot into the sky like a raging storm, illuminating the entirety of Hueco Mundo in blinding light. The force of its emergence warped the air, sending distorted ripples through the very fabric of the dimension. The sheer pressure was overwhelming. The Arrancars could hear it, a deafening roar, like the wailing of an enraged god. Their vision blurred. The sheer radiance of the light disoriented them, making it impossible to discern their surroundings. Their spiritual perception became muddled, their senses scrambled under the onslaught of raw, unbridled power. Their bodies felt weightless, as if they were being tossed into an endless abyss. Rodney gritted his teeth, barely managing to stay afloat in the air. What the hell is this power? Leo's injured body trembled.
He clenched his fists, forcing himself to remain conscious against the oppressive weight pressing down on him. His voice was hoarse as he muttered.
Because he was holding back.
He was never using his full strength.
Chapter 63, 4 against 1 and still got killed. Do you know how to play?
Jerome was so stunned that he found himself at a complete loss for words. The realization hit him like a hammer: his opponent hadn't even been serious until now. Uehara Shiroa spoke leisurely, his voice calm yet laced with unmistakable disdain.
Do you really think that you qualify as Vasto Lord Arrancar just because you've been granted a fragment of their power? And your Arrancar abilities, they're utterly pathetic.
He shook his head, his eyes filled with something akin to disappointment. You've forgotten your origins, the very process of how you became hollows, one step at a time.
The reason the attack titan is so strong is simple: it consumes well.
It devoured its own father to gain its power.
So, if you want to evolve, I suggest you do the same: eat your father, Sailaporo.
His words were like a venomous whisper in the wind, but they carried the weight of an undeniable truth. Only by doing so will you have a chance to become a true Vasto Lord class hollow and earn the right to stand against me. At that moment, as Uehara Shiroa clashed with Jerome, he uncovered the secret behind these so-called Vasto Lorder class hollows. The truth was far less grand than the title implied. These hollows were nothing more than ajuches forcibly injected with void hollow spiritual pressure, undergoing an incomplete Arrancar transformation. That was why their strength barely amounted to this level. In the desolate expanse of Hueco Mundo's barren desert, the Arrancars who stood alongside Jerome were struck speechless by Uehara Shiroa's revelation.
Their expressions darkened as the harsh truth settled in. Jerome's voice trembled with disbelief. How did you know?
For so long, they had believed the illusion. Gaining the power of the Vasto Lord class hollows had convinced them that they had ascended beyond their limits, that they had become Vasto Lord. And once they took on Arrancar forms, that belief solidified even further.
With their newfound strength and intelligence, what else could they be but Vasto Lord?
But Uehara Shiroa scoffed, his gaze piercing through their delusions. It's one thing to deceive others, but don't deceive yourselves. His cold, detached tone sent an unsettling chill through them. To him, they were nothing more than meat laid out on a butcher's block, waiting to be carved apart. In ordinary circumstances, he wouldn't need more than 3 strikes to end one of them. If he fought seriously, he could wipe them all out in an instant. Of course, despite their fraudulent origins, these hollows still possessed considerable power. Certainly stronger than an average Soul Reaper captain. Even so, that didn't mean much in the grand scheme of things. After all, Soul Society's captains were not so easily dismissed. Even in the 1,000-year Blood War, seasoned veterans and ancient captains played critical roles. While ordinary captains struggled against pseudo-spirit king-level threats, they could still hold their ground against lesser foes, at least long enough to make a difference.
Yet, against him? Against Uehara Shiroa, these hollow impostors were little more than gnats before a storm. And he knew it. As he continued to regard them with that same detached expression, the Arrancars couldn't shake the creeping unease curling at the edges of their minds. Why? Why did this Soul Reaper, this supposed enemy, feel more like a hollow than they did? Just as the weight of that thought began to press on them, Uehara Shiroa vanished. Cyril, be careful. Leo barely caught sight of Uehara's blurred figure before he shouted the warning, but it was already too late. The air trembled as an overwhelming spiritual pressure surged like a raging tidal wave, crashing down upon Cyril with unstoppable force. Uehara Shiroa, armed with his omnipotent barrier, could afford to discard all defense when engaging in close combat. Every strike he delivered carried twice the usual impact, making each blow devastating. Even a high-ranking captain would struggle to endure such an onslaught. For Cyril, caught directly in the attack, the experience was akin to being dragged into the abyssal depths of the ocean. His senses blurred, drowning in chaos, and his vision darkened. Instinctively, he raised his massive golden hammer in an attempt to shield himself. Boom! A deafening explosion shook the battlefield as Uehara Shiroa's fist connected,
driving Cyril backward. Without hesitation, Uehara's left hand morphed into a blade, descending with terrifying precision. The force of his strike was so immense that the resulting shockwave cleaved through the air, launching Leo from mid-air before he even had a chance to react. Rodney and Jerome could do nothing but watch, their bodies too sluggish to keep up. Above them, Uehara Shiroha's figure flickered in and out of existence, appearing and disappearing like a phantom in the sky. With every landing, he struck his enemies like a dragonfly skimming the surface of a pond, his attacks relentless. His entire body was attuned to combat, his spiritual pressure refined into raw, unfiltered destruction. Jerome, sensing imminent doom, roared and unleashed the full force of his destructive power in a desperate attempt to shield himself. Rodney, too, scrambled to activate a defensive technique, summoning all the strength he could muster. But it was meaningless. Uehara Shiroha's assault was simply too fast, too overwhelming, too brutal. Despite the protective steel-like skin they possessed as hollows, their defenses crumbled beneath the sheer might of his strikes. In mere moments, Cyril and Rodney were sent hurtling through the air, their bodies plummeting into the endless quicksand below. Leo, the strongest among them, was barely able to remain standing, half kneeling on the ground as he struggled to recover from the previous blow. His breath came in ragged gasps, his body refusing to move as intended. The expressions on the faces of the four Arankars were identical, pure horror. How was this even possible? Uehara Shiroha's power exceeded their worst fears. Every time they thought they had witnessed the full extent of his strength, he proved them wrong again and again. At that moment, Leo made a decision. Don't hold back. Go all out. We must kill him now. There was no room for hesitation. Up until now, Uehara Shiroha hadn't even revealed his Zanpakuto. If they allowed this to continue any longer, they would die without even forcing him to unsheath his true power. If the four of them had any chance of survival, they had to attack together with everything they had. Hearing his command, Cyril and Rodney immediately unleashed their full abilities. Cyril, his body already towering at 3 meters in height, began to grow even larger, his massive golden hammer expanding along with him. Under the immense surge of spiritual pressure, Cyril's body began to expand at an alarming rate. His once massive frame swelled even larger, transforming him into a towering giant. His sheer size alone was enough to blot out the cold moonlight hanging over Hueco Mundo's endless desert. With a deafening roar, he lifted his colossal, millstone-sized hammer high above his head, the force behind his movement causing the air to tremble. Then, like a mountain crashing down from the heavens, he swung it toward Uehara Shiroha with devastating force. His bellow reverberated across Hueco Mundo, a feral, primal sound that sent waves of spiritual pressure rolling across the battlefield. Each of his movements carried overwhelming power, seemingly endless in might and fury. Die! Uehara Shiroha barely glanced up at the descending hammer before his figure flickered out of sight. The next instant, he reappeared in midair and drove his foot straight into Cyril's chest. Cyril's hammer slammed into the ground with a resounding crash, missing its target entirely. The sheer impact of the blow sent tremors rippling through the desert. Frustration flared in the giant's eyes as he let out a thunderous roar. Roar! His voice was a bestial snarl, raw and untamed. In that moment, his mind seemed to abandon all rationality. Enraged by his missed attack, he swung his massive left hand large enough to resemble a fan, to grab Uehara Shiroha, intending to crush him in his grip. However, before his muscles could fully tense, Uehara's foot had already landed on his chest. The instant contact was made, Cyril's massive form suddenly froze, as if an invisible force had slammed into him. And then, boom! A cataclysmic shockwave erupted from the point of impact, sending a powerful hurricane of force in all directions. Cyril's massive, hill-like body was launched backward like a ragdoll, flung into the air as if he weighed nothing at all. He crashed into the desert floor, his body carving a deep trench in the sand as he skidded violently. A massive crater formed beneath him, the sand blasted away by the sheer force of his landing. Uehara Shiroha wasted no time. In a single flicker of movement, he appeared beside the crater. Before Cyril could even groan in pain. Bam! Uehara's fist slammed into his skull with crushing force. Cyril's massive body convulsed, then went completely still.
His consciousness slipped away, and in the next instant, he was out. One down. Uehara Shiroa barely gave the fallen Arrancar another glance before vanishing once more, reappearing midair with Rodney locked in his sights. At this moment, Rodney had already completed the preparations for his ultimate attack.
A sinister grin curled his lips as he lifted his Zanpakuto.
In the next moment, his blade dissolved into countless flaming arrows, each one pulsating with lethal energy. Burn in hell! Rodney sneered as he released his technique.
A rain of fire filled the sky. Each flaming arrow was sharp enough to melt through steel with ease. The overwhelming heat distorted the air itself, and the sheer number of projectiles turned the battlefield into a blazing inferno. This was Rodney's most terrifying ability. Even an experienced Vasto Lord would struggle to escape unscathed. Rodney's grin widened as he pictured Uehara writhing in agony, his body pierced by thousands of flames before being reduced to ash.
This is it.
This is what true power looks like, he thought, feeling exhilaration course through him.
But then, something was wrong.
Amidst the fiery storm, Uehara Shiroa's figure flickered.
He wasn't burning. He wasn't struggling.
Instead, he was dodging.
One by one, the flaming arrows missed their mark. Rodney's eyes widened in absolute disbelief. Uehara Shiroa's movements defied logic.
With each step, he twisted his body just enough to let an arrow brush past harmlessly.
The high-speed projectiles that should have been inescapable now seemed laughably slow.
To him, they weren't deadly flames. They were merely drifting embers. From the outside, it appeared as though time itself had frozen around him. His movements were so precise, so fluid, that not a single arrow could so much as graze his robes.
Not one.
His posture remained elegant, his breathing relaxed. Nothing had changed. He was untouched. Watching from a distance, Jerome and Leo could only stare in horror.
This is impossible. They had fought countless battles, witnessed Rodney's ultimate technique annihilate enemy after enemy.
At the very least, it should have inflicted some damage. But this was beyond anything they had ever seen. Rodney, the one who had been grinning moments ago, now stood frozen in place, his mind failing to process what had just happened. Then, his vision blurred. A cold sensation spread across his chest.
His body flew backward. Uehara Shiroa had already moved. Before Rodney could react, Uehara finished him off midair.
By the time he crashed into the sand, he was done.
3 down. When Uehara landed back on the battlefield, his gaze turned toward the last two standing enemies, Leo and Jerome.
His eyes were cold.
I'm getting bored. If you have any last tricks, use them now. Hearing those words, Jerome's face turned pale.
His mind screamed a single thought.
I have to get out of here.
Without hesitation, he turned and ran.
Monster!
We can't beat him, he shrieked, fear warping his voice. Leo, who had been closely observing Uehara's movements, shouted out in panic, Jerome, watch out.
Shing!
A flash of white light streaked across the battlefield. Jerome staggered. Then, he collapsed into the sand. A long slash wound stretched across his chest, blood staining the golden dunes beneath him. Lying there, he gazed at the crescent moon in the sky, feeling the warmth seep from his body. As his life force drained away, the world around him suddenly felt distant, both familiar and utterly alien at the same time.
4 down.
Now, only Leo remained. Standing alone amidst the fallen bodies of his comrades, Leo gasped for breath, his eyes filled with sheer despair. He looked at them, Cyril, Rodney, Jerome, all of them defeated so effortlessly.
How had it come to this? Once, they had believed themselves invincible. After gaining their Arrancar powers, they had felt unstoppable. They had been confident, arrogant even. But now,
they had been reduced to nothing more than prey. Blood dripped from his shoulder. His left arm lay severed on the ground. Leo swallowed, his throat dry as sand. That speed. Those 2 slashes. The first had cut down Jerome. The second had come straight for him and had nearly ended his life. But at the last moment, his battle instincts had saved him. He had dodged, barely. And the price was his left arm. Uehara Shiroa regarded him with an indifferent gaze. As expected, you're the strongest among them. Your reaction was impressive. Leo forced out a weak chuckle. I appreciate the compliment, but if you had targeted me first, I'd already be dead. Before today, he had believed he and his comrades were on par with Vasto lords, perhaps even superior. Is the gap so huge? Jerome never had the chance to realize the truth. Even an ordinary Vasto lord wouldn't have lasted a second against Uehara Shiroa. At this moment, Uehara Shiroa stood calm and composed, his grip firm around his weapon. He was ready to end it once and for all. However, just as he was about to deliver the finishing blow, his expression shifted slightly. A disturbance in space. His sharp senses immediately detected something unusual, a sudden and dramatic fluctuation in the void. Coordinate positioning? Space displacement, he mused, his brow furrowing slightly. Above them, the sky split apart, and from the yawning black cavity, dozens of grotesque, long-nosed Jillians emerged, each one bearing the eerie resemblance of twisted clowns. Without hesitation, the Jillians began chanting in eerie synchronization, launching an anti-membrane technique at the fallen Arankars below. In a blinding flash, four golden beams of light shot down from the cavity, piercing through space itself and enveloping the unconscious Cyril, Rodney, and Jerome along with the injured Leo. In the blink of an eye, the golden beams whisked them away, teleporting them into the black cavity above before Uehara Shiroa could strike them down. Inside the golden passageway of the anti-membrane, Leo, though still weak from his injuries, clenched his only remaining fist, his expression shifting from despair to relief and gratitude. Thank you for saving my life, Lord Sailaporo, he gasped, his voice trembling with emotion. I, Leo, will forever pledge my loyalty to you. At that moment, everything clicked in Uehara Shiroa's mind. He immediately understood Aizen's plan. The first goal was to test Uehara himself, to see whether he intended to interfere in Hueco Mundo's affairs and to gauge whether he was an independent variable like Otsutsuki Naruto. The second goal was to assess the experimental Arankars, evaluating whether infusing them with Vasto Lord-class hollow spiritual pressure was a viable path forward. The third goal was to see whether Uehara Shiroa could affect the anti-membrane. Aizen was thorough. If the anti-membrane was to serve as an unshakable escape mechanism, it had to be foolproof. And yet, knowing Aizen, there were likely even more layers to this test. A fourth or even a fifth hidden purpose buried within his grand chessboard of schemes. But Uehara Shiroa didn't care. Aizen could play his 1,000-layer strategy game all he wanted, it wouldn't change the absolute truth of battle. As long as my strength is overwhelming, no amount of calculations or scheming will matter. It was time to show the true power of Shunkyo. In an instant, the world itself trembled. Uehara Shiroa released a titanic wave of spiritual pressure, and it erupted outward like a tsunami, shaking the very fabric of Hueco Mundo. Nearby, countless lesser hollows and ajuchas fled in sheer terror, scattering like insects in the face of the immense power. A massive pillar of golden light shot into the sky, its brilliance outshining even the crescent moon hanging above Hueco Mundo. It's useless, Shinigami. From within the golden passageway, Leo sneered. Despite his injuries, he managed a defiant smirk as he stared at Uehara from beyond the anti-membrane. You are powerful, there's no doubt about that. But no matter how strong you are, you cannot reach us. His confidence stemmed from one undeniable fact: the anti-membrane's protection was absolute. Throughout the history of the Arankars, the anti-membrane had never failed. It had always been a perfect failsafe, a tool that guaranteed survival. Uehara Shiroa knew that better than anyone. Yet, instead of reacting with frustration, he merely smiled. I know. His voice was calm, almost casual. The moment the anti-membrane was activated, you were no longer in this space. Right now, you exist only as an afterimage, a ripple in an alternate dimension, moving at high speed. Leo's eyes widened in shock. You knew? His voice trembled slightly.
If Uehara was aware of how the anti-membrane functioned, then why was he still wasting energy trying to reach them? But Uehara Shiroa ignored him. Instead, he lifted Shunkyo, his grip tightening around its hilt. He poured his immense spiritual pressure into the blade, and in response, Shunkyo shuddered, as if eager, hungry, to be unleashed. A slow smirk spread across Uehara's lips. Soberano, you can't wait any longer, can you? See, his voice carried both confidence and dominance as he raised the sword high. Then come forth and rule the world. Bankai Shunkyo Jikusen, fleeting void, spiraling spacetime. Boom! A blinding golden explosion tore through the battlefield. The world itself shifted. The sky and the earth merged into one, dissolving all boundaries. A limitless void surrounded them, an infinite plane of nothingness where only Uehara Shiroa and the 4 captured Arankars remained. Even time and space themselves seemed to lose their meaning here. The only thing that existed within this realm was Shunkyo's spiritual pressure and overwhelming, absolute force of control. Suddenly, the void shuddered. And from above, countless golden gears materialized, forming massive walls that began descending at an astonishing speed. Before Leo could react, the golden gears pierced through his and his companions' bodies. Leo's breath caught in his throat. A phantom pain spread through him. Panic surged in his chest. Had they been killed instantly? He clenched his jaw, instinctively channeling his spiritual pressure to defend himself. Only to realize something horrifying. The gears weren't real. They were phantoms, illusions without physical form. And yet, the moment they passed through his body, something felt wrong. Then, 5 seconds. Uehara Shiroa's calm voice echoed in the infinite space. The moment those words left his lips, the golden gears began to rotate. Counterclockwise. 5 revolutions. Leo's heart pounded violently in his chest. A deep, gnawing dread crept into his bones as an ominous realization sank in. What? What did you just do? His voice shook. Is this your Bankai? What do these gears represent? Chapter 64, The Strong changed color, and all parties were shocked. Give up. No matter what you try, you can't break through the anti-membrane's protection. Leo's voice held a trace of triumph as he gazed at Uehara Shiroa from within the golden channel. However, Uehara Shiroa merely smirked. I'm sorry to inform you, but you're already dead. Before Leo could react, Uehara Shiroa's figure blurred, moving at speeds too fast for the eye to follow. His blade sliced through empty space, sending ripples through the void with each strike. With every attack, the golden gears of his Bankai froze a shadow in place. Leo's breath hitched as he examined the frozen figures more closely, his eyes widened in horror. The shadows trapped within the gears were himself, Rodney, Cyril, and Jerome. What? A wave of dread washed over him. He had no idea what this space was, nor did he understand the meaning behind those shadows. But if Leo had been able to step outside the influence of Shunkyo Jikusen, he would have noticed something terrifying. The spots where Uehara Shiroa had attacked just now were precisely the positions where he and his comrades had stood 5 seconds ago. A chill ran down his spine. What had just happened? After finishing his attacks, Uehara Shiroa finally stopped. His eyes flickered with quiet satisfaction as he looked over the boundless space of golden gears surrounding them. Shunkyo, you've worked hard. As his voice fell, the world began to shift. The golden gears started fading, and in an instant, everything snapped back to reality. The desert landscape of Hueco Mundo returned to normal. The suffocating energy of Bankai disappeared, leaving behind only the faint echoes of its lingering power. Inside the anti-membrane channel, Leo let out a slow, relieved breath. They had survived. As expected. Even a deadly attack from that Bankai was meaningless in the face of the anti-membrane's protection. He forced a smile, exhaustion weighing heavily on him. That ability was terrifying. But in the end, it was futile. Just as he was about to relax completely, a sharp sensation coursed through his body. The space inside the anti-membrane trembled. And then, their heads disappeared. Leo, Cyril, Rodney, and Jerome, all four of them were decapitated simultaneously. It happened in an instant, as if the void had suddenly swallowed their heads whole. Leo never even had the chance to process what was happening. The relieved expression on his face never turned into a smile. His headless body crumpled to the ground, blood spraying across the golden space. The anti-membrane shattered. The golden passageway collapsed, and the Jillian hollows in the sky vanished, retreating into the closing black cavity. Uehara Shiroa stood still, his expression unreadable, as the last remnants of his Bankai's effects faded into nothingness. At that very moment, across the three realms, a collective chill ran down the spines of all powerful beings. Whether it was Yamamoto Genryosei Shigekuni, Aizen Sasuke, Kayaraka Shunsui, or the high-ranking hollows of Hueco Mundo, even the prisoners of hell and the Quincy of the Wandenrake. They all felt it. An inexplicable, primal dread crept into their bones, triggering a moment of instinctive fear. Even beings in the Soul King Palace and the deepest depths of hell were not immune to this feeling. The sensation was fleeting, lasting only a few seconds. But it was real. In the lofty halls of the Soul King Palace, a certain monk in black robes chuckled to himself, stroking his beard with interest. So, this is the true form of Shunkyo? His eyes gleamed with fascination as he muttered the name of Uehara Shiroa's Bankai aloud. Bankai, Shunkyo Jikusen. His deep voice echoed through the sacred halls. A Zanpakuto with a terrifying ability that transcends time and space. A power that manipulates temporal flow, yet does not disrupt the foundation of the three realms. Though he was the leader of the Royal Guard, the ability itself did not particularly impress him. After all, if the Blood Alliance seal were lifted, even the weakest member of the Zero Division could unleash a Bankai capable of shattering the three realms. But this was different. This was the first time in Soul Society's history that a Zanpakuto could truly manipulate time and space. Interesting. But in the end, even space-time techniques are not rare among the Royal Guard. The only reason we do not use them is because they may destabilize the realms. A smile of approval tugged at his lips. Still, this one is different. He wields great power without disrupting the balance. That alone is impressive. At the same time, in Las Noches, a heavy silence filled Kayanyaku Palace. Aizen sat at the head of the room, his piercing eyes staring at the four headless corpses sprawled on the cold floor. Beside him, Ikemaro Jin, Tozin Kaname, and Sailaporo Gran stood wordlessly, their expressions dark. Jin, usually one to make light of any situation, narrowed his eyes and muttered. Phew. Good thing we didn't rely on the anti-membrane to escape, huh? A teasing smile tugged at his lips, but there was no humor in his tone. This was terrifying. How had someone like Uehara Shiroa graduated from the academy before him? Jin had always thought himself an anomaly, an unprecedented prodigy, a shadow lurking beyond Aizen's gaze. And yet, compared to this man, just what kind of freak did the academy produce? Tozin Kaname remained grimly silent. If it hadn't been for Aizen's warning, he might have ended up like those four corpses on the floor. Across the room, Aizen finally broke the silence, his voice cool and measured. Sailaporo, have you learned anything from this? The scientist pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, his usual smug arrogance replaced by genuine intrigue. Fascinating. His eyes gleamed as he stared at the footage of Uehara Shiroa's Bankai on the surveillance monitors. According to the data, Uehara Shiroa eliminated all four Arankars after they had been absorbed into the anti-membrane. Sailaporo let out a low chuckle, adjusting his coat. A truly interesting ability. To reach across dimensions. To manipulate time and space itself. He tapped his fingers thoughtfully against the table. It's difficult to say whether this is a purely space-time ability, or if it functions more like a delayed onset technique, akin to a cursed ability. His lips curled upward. But tell me, Aizen-sama, are all Shinigami Bankai this ridiculous? At this moment, Sailaporo Grans turned his burning gaze toward Ikemaro Jin and Tozin Kaname, his expression practically gleaming with excitement. His golden eyes carried an unsettling intensity,
as if he were mentally dissecting them on the spot, his fingers twitching with the urge to experiment. Jin, ever the actor, placed a hand over his heart in feigned fear.
Of course, that's impossible.
And your eyes are terrifying, Sailaporo, he exclaimed dramatically. Then, he tilted his head in curiosity, his tone shifting to one of genuine intrigue.
Still, there's something I don't quite get. The surveillance footage only captured fragments of the battle, but didn't Uehara Shiroa's Bankai seem different from last time?
A glimmer of sharpness flashed in his serpentine eyes as he continued.
Could it be a new Bankai ability? Or...
Jin trailed off, his voice dipping into a whisper.
Is this guy really Otsutsuki Naruto, using one of those bizarre techniques of his?
The memory of that night, the night of the holification incident, was still fresh in Jin's mind.
The techniques used by Otsutsuki Naruto had been unlike anything a Shinigami should possess. They were mysterious. Unnatural.
Aizen, who had been silent until now, smiled faintly and interjected.
We've miscalculated once before. We can't afford to make the same mistake again.
It would be foolish to make a hasty judgment on Uehara Shiroha now. His glacial gaze then darkened slightly as he added. That said, the power of time and space is indeed quite tempting. Aizen turned his thoughts to Hueco Mundo's former king, whose power revolved around the concept of aging, a manifestation of time itself. However, even that terrifying aura of decay had never been able to affect space itself. In comparison, Uehara Shiroha's ability was on an entirely different level.
Interesting. Much more useful than mere decay.
Sailaporo adjusted his glasses, his eyes gleaming with scientific fervor. I've already sent my little darlings to the battlefield to collect any lingering traces of his spiritual pressure and data. His fingers twitched with barely contained excitement as he continued. Next time, I will enhance the anti-membrane stability, refining the technology until it's flawless. We won't let him slip away so easily again. But then, he hesitated for a brief moment before asking. Lord Aizen, about the artificial hollow project.
Shall we proceed? His eagerness was palpable. No scientist, especially not one like Sailaporo, would pass up the chance to experiment on the forbidden power of time and space. The excitement of unraveling the unknown was intoxicating. However, Aizen shook his head. Cease all further progress on that front. A flicker of disappointment crossed Sailaporo's face. But then Aizen's next words rekindled his excitement. However, it may be worth experimenting with an entirely new concept. Using the souls of Shinigami to synthesize an entirely new breed of hollow.
A cruel smirk tugged at his lips.
Uehara Shiroha has opened my eyes to new possibilities within the realm of evolution.
Jin's smile sharpened, a cold glint flashing in his serpentine eyes.
Lord Aizen, why not simply kill this old classmate of mine?
His voice was soft, but there was a blade hidden beneath his words. That ability of his, it could interfere with our plans.
Tozen Kaname tightened his grip on his Zanpakuto, Suzamushi, his expression dark and determined. Justice shall never retreat, Lord Aizen. Allow me to eliminate him immediately.
But Aizen simply closed his eyes for a moment, his smirk never faltering.
Uehara Shiroha or Otsutsuki Naruto was fully aware that by revealing his ability, he would attract our attention.
He reopened his eyes, his gaze as cold and calculating as ever.
And yet, he still chose to do it anyway. Jin's expression remained unreadable. That means he wants us to react? Aizen's smirk deepened. Exactly.
A glint of amusement flickered in his gaze.
It's the same as Hollow Knight.
He's perfectly fine with us making our next move. He turned away from his subordinates, his mind already a dozen steps ahead. Besides, he is the perfect tool to test the limits of the incomplete Hogyoku. His voice was laced with pure confidence. Let him serve his purpose.
If he eliminates unqualified Arankars along the way, even better.
Though Jin, Tozen, and Sailaporo all lowered their heads in acceptance, a shadow of doubt flickered across Tozen's face. Jin, on the other hand, remained as unreadable as ever, as if he had already expected this outcome. Sailaporo, however, hid his true thoughts behind a sly smirk. His mind was already racing with new experiments to conduct. While Aizen and his subordinates had access to direct information, the same could not be said for the rest of Soul Society or the Visored. Within the barrier of the Visored, tension ran high. The sudden surge of spiritual pressure had startled them, leaving many to suspect that their holification process was destabilizing. Hachijin Ashoda, the barrier specialist, wasted no time in reinforcing layer upon layer of protective seals, only to reach an unexpected conclusion.
It's not coming from us. A heavy silence settled among them. If it wasn't them, then who the hell possessed such power that even their hidden barrier was affected? Meanwhile, in the human world inside Urahara Kisuke's small, unassuming shop, the atmosphere was anything but casual.
Tessite Sakabashi, his towering frame imposing, finished casting a high-level Kido before nodding toward Urahara.
Manager, the confirmation is complete.
Even Soul Society felt the disturbance.
A heavy pause followed. What do you think? Could it be Aizen's doing? Urahara Kisuke, who had been quietly analyzing the situation, finally spoke.
If it were Aizen, he would have been much more subtle. Adjusting his hat, his sharp eyes glimmered with intrigue. We didn't detect any significant fluctuations in spiritual pressure in the human world, nor did anything major happen in Siriidii. Then, suddenly, his expression changed. A spark of realization flickered in his gaze.
That means...
His voice dropped to a murmur.
Hueco Mundo.
A slow smirk spread across his lips.
Are you finally making your move? He leaned forward, an unmistakable gleam of excitement in his eyes. This is going to be interesting. I'll be watching closely. Tessai frowned in confusion. Manager? Urahara didn't answer.
Instead, his grin widened.
Hueco Mundo, under the moonlight.
Beneath the pale crescent moon, Uehara Shiroa stood motionless, his white haori billowing in the cold desert breeze. Bankai, Shunkyo Jikusen, is the first stage of Shunkyo's Bankai, and its effect is deceptively simple. It allows Uehara Shiroa to exert his power upon enemies in the past. By erasing an enemy's past, he effectively destroys their present and future, eliminating them from existence itself. Meanwhile, Shunkyo's second stage Shurkai grants him the ability to manipulate space, allowing him to strike his opponents using spatial distortions. This attack, similar to the Kamui technique, possesses immense lethality and can bypass traditional defenses entirely. However, its biggest limitation lies in its accuracy. Hitting a high-speed, evasive target is far more challenging than simply attacking a stationary foe. Against ordinary enemies, this presents no issue. But when facing true monsters, those who have mastered high-speed movement techniques or possess absurdly overpowered abilities, the window of opportunity to land a fatal strike becomes significantly harder to grasp. Upon activating Bankai Shunkyo Jikusen, Uehara Shiroa could directly attack enemies in the past, wielding the power of space as his weapon. It was an ability that defied conventional combat logic. If his attack landed, the enemy would die, no exceptions. It was, in short, broken. The stronger the enemy, the greater the spiritual pressure consumption when invoking Shunkyo Jikusen. With his current level, he could guarantee an instant kill on a Millennium Captain level opponent, but against those who had transcended that tier. Even for him, it would still be difficult. For now. That, however, was only a matter of time. With a Bankai this powerful, it would be greedy to ask for even more. Uehara Shiroa turned his gaze toward Kainyaku Palace, where Aizen resided. A faint smirk tugged at his lips. Aizen should be quite pleased with the little gift I sent him. Logically speaking, with a hidden second-stage Bankai, there was a chance that he could deceive Aizen. But Uehara Shiroa knew better. Aizen was not someone who could be easily tricked. And besides, he had no reason to try. He was neither a noble nor a loyal dog of the Soul King. There was no obligation for him to take up arms against Aizen for the sake of Soul Society. If Aizen was rational enough to establish an understanding, then Uehara Shiroa wouldn't mind maintaining a mutual non-interference. Of course, his true confidence didn't come from alliances or diplomacy. It lay in his trump cards.
The Soul Gem. The second stage Bankai. And countless future mission rewards that had yet to manifest. That was his true foundation.
While lost in thought, he slowly made his way back to the Hueco Mundo base.
Once a month, Uehara Shiroa conducted his routine patrol around the base. The primary objective? To eliminate any nearby threats, hollows that posed potential risks to the base's stability.
However, after tonight's display, it was highly unlikely that any hollow in Hueco Mundo would dare to act up for the next few years. As he reflected on the previous battle, he analyzed the combat experience he had gained. The hollow's abilities and techniques had been flashy, but ultimately, they lacked real lethality. All that flair, but their actual damage was nothing more than scratches. With his Bankai mastery, their so-called ultimate moves barely registered as a threat. Still, he would take note. Upon arriving at the base, the atmosphere changed instantly. The moment the subordinates saw him, their admiring gazes locked onto his figure. These were no ordinary soldiers, many of them were once notorious villains, powerful and ruthless in their own right. Yet now, as they stood before their commander, their expressions contained nothing but reverence and fear. Even though they had only experienced the aftermath of his battle from afar, it had been enough to weaken their legs and choke their breath. They could hardly imagine what it had been like at the center of that battlefield.
Some of them had harbored ambitions before.
Some had even entertained thoughts of defiance.
But now, every single one of those reckless thoughts had been erased. Even the boldest among them knew better now. We may be ruthless, they thought, but compared to him, we are nothing. Uehara Shiroha, however, paid them no attention. He simply strode through the base, his presence alone commanding absolute silence. He headed toward the very heart of the base, to a hidden entrance, concealed behind layers of security. With a casual step forward, he passed through an invisible barrier, reaching a staircase that led deep underground. Each step he took activated new layers of defense. The further he descended, the more heavily fortified the barriers became. In terms of defensive security, the protection here was on par with Soul Society's great noble families, perhaps even more extreme. At the end of the staircase lay a vast underground laboratory, brightly illuminated despite its depth. The moment he stepped inside, dozens of researchers immediately stood up in unison. "Commander, thank you for your hard work," they saluted, their voices filled with absolute respect. Unlike the soldiers, these technicians were his most trusted personnel. To them, Uehara Shiroa was not just a leader. He was a visionary, the one who had given them opportunities and trust that they never would have received in Soul Society. Unlike the Shinigami's Technology Development Bureau, where scientists were undervalued, the court army had elevated them to their rightful status. Here, their work was recognized. Their contributions mattered. Uehara Shiroha nodded slightly in acknowledgement. "I've already reviewed your research progress. You're doing well." His voice was calm, yet it carried weight. "The court army will not forget your contributions." The technicians' eyes burned with passion. "To serve the commander and the court army is our greatest honor," they responded in unison. For them, death meant nothing if it was for the cause they now believed in. Time passed in a blur. 2 months had gone by since the battle. And during this time, the world had grown eerily silent. Whether in Hueco Mundo, Siriatii, or the human world, the strong had all chosen to lie low. No major battles. No unnecessary conflicts. It was as if a silent agreement had been reached among the great powers. For now, they would focus on their own developments, each one preparing for what was to come. Chapter 65, Aizen's Gift, the Tsuneyashiro family's plan. Even the ever-lazy Kayaraka Shunsui had started putting in effort, diligently practicing for an extended period, a rare sight indeed. On the other hand, Uehara Shiroha continued his usual routine of playing music and dancing, completely unbothered by the tense atmosphere that had settled over Siriatii. At this moment, Kayaraka Shunsui was pretending to rub his lower back, groaning dramatically as he complained. "Ah, my old waist.
I've been so busy lately that I haven't even had time to enjoy a good drink. By the way, Shiroha, have you still not figured anything out about that matter? Despite the light-hearted tone, there was an underlying seriousness to his words. Even after 2 months, they had yet to pinpoint the origin of the sudden sense of crisis that had washed over them. Because of this, the captains of the Gotei 13 had remained on high alert, their vigilance unwavering. Not even the 1,000-year-old captain commander, Kayaraka Shunsui, dared to let his guard down. Uehara Shiroha, however, remained as carefree as ever. Holding a wineglass leisurely, he took a sip before answering. Brother Kayaraku, you know me too well. Apart from having fun, I don't particularly concern myself with anything else. Besides, even if the sky were to collapse, isn't there always someone above to hold it up? His words were ambiguous, but Kayaraka Shunsui was no fool. He immediately caught the deeper meaning. Shiroha had chosen not to report what had happened in Hueco Mundo, nor had he revealed the true power of Shunkyo-s Bankai. One of the reasons for this was to ensure that Siriitii Shinigami wouldn't grow too complacent. If they became overly relaxed, they would be unprepared for the wave of major events looming on the horizon. Fortunately, Siriitii was still in a relatively stable position. Meanwhile, in the shadows, the Invisible Empire was still celebrating Yhwach's early awakening. The Quincy's, in their arrogance, believed that their so-called Great King was the only one capable of shaking the powerhouses of the three realms. What a pity! At this moment, Yhwach himself probably wasn't even capable of typing a question mark. The top, huh? Kayaraka Shunsui chuckled as he swirled the sake in his cup, his eyes narrowing with amusement. He had caught on to Uehara Shiroha's underlying message. The top Shiroha was referring to was not merely the higher-ups of Siriitii. He was also alluding to the Royal Guard, the Zero Division that resided in the Soul King's palace. However, Kayaraka Shunsui had never held a particularly favorable opinion of those high-ranking nobles or even the Royal Guard itself. They might have been hailed as Siriitii's ultimate protectors, but in reality, they had done little to involve themselves in the struggles of the lower world. With that in mind, he raised his cup slightly and remarked, "Sometimes, you can't just put all your hopes in others. Don't you think so, Brother Shiroha?" "Of course. In the end, you can only rely on yourself." Then, he lifted his cup towards Kayaraka Shunsui and grinned mischievously. "But don't think you can dump all the troublesome responsibilities on me, Brother Kayaraku." He wasn't oblivious to Kayaraku's intentions. The latter was subtly trying to push him toward becoming a future captain. But Shiroha had no interest in that hassle. Why deal with the burdens of a captain when he could enjoy his life as an emperor within the court army? The two exchanged knowing smiles before clinking their cups together and taking a sip of their drinks. There was an unspoken understanding between them. A conversation between smart men required no excess words. In a luxurious private office, Uehara Shiroha sat comfortably as Ayase Nanao placed a thick stack of documents in front of him. Unlike the usual paperwork, today's stack was particularly hefty. He casually picked up the documents and flipped through them. But as he skimmed the contents, a flicker of intrigue flashed through his eyes. Some of these documents shouldn't be here. They contained classified information about the Tsunayoshiro family, including member lists, barrier protocols, and secret orders. Even more suspiciously, a faint, mist-like energy covered the pages, distorting the surface of the documents in an unnatural way. At that moment, Uehara Shiroha immediately understood this was the power of Kyoka Suigetsu. Because of Aizen's illusionary ability, Ayase Nanao had failed to notice anything unusual about these documents. Without revealing his thoughts, he calmly signed off on the paperwork. Once that was done, he indulged in some playful banter with Nanao before finally setting the signed documents aside. Only then did he return his attention to the mysterious files. He read through them carefully, his gaze sharp. Thanks to his previous experiences sneaking into the Tsunayoshiro family estate, he could confirm that the contents of these documents were authentic. Aizen had attached Kyoka Suigetsu's allusion to these files as both a signature and a test. It was a silent message. "If you cannot even see through this, you are not qualified to cooperate with me." Aizen was truly a schemer, a master manipulator with countless tricks up his sleeve.
But Uehara Shiroa understood one thing very well.
The so-called cooperation between them was nothing more than a mutual exchange of interests, one built on caution and constant vigilance. In the end, the benefits of Soul Society would belong to him, while the benefits of Hueco Mundo would go to Aizen. For now, they were merely playing along, seeing everything but leaving it unspoken.
However, who would have the last laugh?
That would ultimately depend on their respective abilities, strategies, and hidden trump cards. As that thought crossed his mind, Uehara Shiroa shifted his focus inward, looking at the task panel within his sea of consciousness. A smirk tugged at the corners of his lips. 3 days later, deep within the meeting hall of the Tsuneyashiro family estate, the head of the family, Tsuneyashiro Tokikawa, sat at the head of a long table, his piercing gaze sweeping over the 5 elders before him. The dim candlelight flickered, casting ominous shadows across the lavishly adorned chamber, enhancing the suffocating atmosphere.
With an air of absolute authority, he spoke in a calm, yet commanding tone.
In recent days, there have been frequent disturbances within our family's barriers and enchantments. This is not a mere coincidence. It is a sign, one that should not be ignored.
What are your thoughts on this matter? The 5 elders exchanged glances, their expressions dark and contemplative.
A hushed murmur spread across the table as they began discussing the possible culprits behind these mysterious disruptions.
The remnants of the lesser noble families lacked the strength to pose such a threat. If someone is interfering, it must be the work of another great noble house. Could it be the Shiba family? One elder speculated.
They have long held grievances against our actions.
The Shiba, another scoffed. They've been exiled to Rokangai, their influence diminished. What could they possibly do in their current state?
Third elder, a more cautious voice interjected, do not underestimate them. They still possess the technology to launch the Tenchu chariot. If they manage to gather enough resources, they might still be able to challenge us.
Humph, the great elder sneered. If given the opportunity, we must eliminate them completely. The Shiba family should never be allowed a chance to regain their footing. Another elder stroked his beard thoughtfully. Perhaps it is the Shihoin family? That Otsutsuki Naruto is indeed formidable, someone admitted.
But the Shihoin family has been cooperative as of late.
It is unlikely they would betray us now.
At that moment, the strongest of the 5 elders, Tsuneyoshiro Shinken, hesitated before speaking in a low voice.
I still remember the ominous sensation I felt 2 months ago. Could it be that the Spirit King?
Before he could finish, Tsuneyoshiro Tokikawa abruptly cut him off, his voice sharp with warning.
5th elder, be mindful of your words. His words carried an undeniable weight, silencing the room instantly.
The other 4 elders shot Tsuneyoshiro Shinken disapproving glares. His recklessness had nearly touched upon a forbidden subject. Within the Tsuneyoshiro family, the Spirit King was not to be questioned. Even the mere mention of his existence in a speculative manner could be considered blasphemous.
A brief silence lingered before Tsuneyoshiro Tokikawa finally spoke again, his tone unwavering.
No matter where this threat originates, we must act for the sake of the family. Effective immediately, all key locations will have their defenses reinforced, and patrols will be doubled. His voice grew colder, more ruthless. Furthermore, we will proceed with the plan, the systematic elimination of Foolbringers in the human world.
Their power belongs to us. We will reclaim what is rightfully ours.
The 5 elders nodded in agreement, their gazes filled with a mix of ambition and malice. Mere lowly ants have no right to wield the power of the Spirit King. Such strength can only reach its full potential in the hands of those who truly deserve it, us. Their sacrifice will be a small price to pay for the stability of the 3 realms. Yet, despite their composed words, greed burned in their eyes. They were old, some of the oldest beings in Soul Society. But they desired more time, more power. Beneath the surface, under the guise of noble duty, the Tsuneyoshiro family had long been conducting forbidden experiments. They had tampered with holification research, attempted soul fusion technology, and dabbled in countless unspeakable practices. And yet, every experiment had failed. Now, their next target was the Foolbringers, beings whose powers originated from fragments of the Spirit King himself.
To the Tsunayoshiro, the logic was simple.
If we can control their abilities, we can obtain the immortality of the Royal Guard, the Zero Division.
Tsunayoshiro Tokikawa understood this well.
And he fully intended to seize that power for himself.
After obtaining the secret intelligence on the Tsunayoshiro family, Uehara Shiroa made no immediate moves. He wasn't in a rush.
The downfall of the Tsunayoshiro family was inevitable. They were a family despised by both heaven and earth. Their arrogance, their cruelty, it would all lead to their self-destruction. Even without his interference, the cracks in their foundation were already beginning to show. So instead of acting recklessly, Uehara Shiroa continued his daily life as usual, completing routine tasks and enjoying the pleasures of leisure. Whenever he had time, he would take casual strolls to the video hall. With his mastery of hidden Kido techniques and his ability to erase his presence, he could freely access even the most heavily guarded areas of Seoul society. The video hall, like the Great Spirit Book Gallery, was another highly classified department, one that had long been under Tsunayoshiro control.
Its function?
To monitor the movements of the human world, Seoul society, and eventually, even Hueco Mundo. This department was, in essence, the Sky Eye system of the three realms. Originally, it had been managed by all five great noble families. However, as the influence of the others declined, the Tsunayoshiro family seized control, monopolizing the intelligence network for their own purposes.
And Uehara Shiroa had his eyes on it.
A system this powerful should belong to the court army.
For that reason alone, the Tsunayoshiro family had to fall.
In recent days, he had noticed a shift in their surveillance patterns. They had increased security around the video hall, focusing their efforts on monitoring the Fullbringers in the human world.
Even Tsunayoshiro Tokanada had been dispatched.
Despite his past crimes being exposed, his punishment had been nothing more than the confiscation of his Zanpakuto.
Even his imprisonment was a farce.
Behind closed doors, he was treated no differently than a free man. Seeing all of this, Uehara Shiroa knew that Tsunayoshiro family was about to make their move.
And sure enough, a few days later,
a summons from the Gotei 13 arrived. A captain's meeting had been called.
Although Uehara Shiroa was not officially a captain, his strength and status granted him the privilege to attend.
And today, it wasn't a routine meeting. Something major had happened. With that thought, he made his way to the captain's office. By the time he arrived, all the captains were already present, their expressions solemn. As his gaze swept across the room, he found Kayaraka Shunsui seated at the head of the assembly. The captain commander, however, remained utterly unmoved.
As Uehara Shiroa entered the captain's office, the atmosphere inside was both tense and familiar.
Kayaraka Shunsui, ever the carefree man, greeted him with a wave and a lazy smile, as if this were nothing more than another routine gathering. Nearby, Shiba Ishin, who, for once, was not sitting in his usual relaxed manner, gave Uehara a slight nod of acknowledgement. On the other hand, Zaraki Kenpachi was looking at him with unmistakable bloodthirsty excitement, his manic grin stretching from ear to ear. It was as if he had just discovered a rare, priceless treasure that he was itching to test his blade against. Meanwhile, Ikemaro Jin and Aizen stood together, two masters of deception.
Jin, ever the enigma, had his usual fox-like grin, his eyes closed in amusement as if he were simply enjoying a good show.
Aizen, however, wore a thoughtful expression, his brow slightly furrowed, a man burdened by the weight of the world, or, at least, someone who wanted to appear that way. The other captains held their usual expressions. Suifeng, Unohana Retsu, and Tozen Kaname remained as indifferent as ever, their faces unreadable, as if this meeting had nothing to do with them.
Karatsuchi Mayuri and Kamamura Sajin were difficult to read.
One hid his face beneath an elaborate mask, the other beneath a canine visage.
Whatever their thoughts, they remained silent.
What stood out most, however, was the presence of Yukitake Jushiro. The captain of the 13th Division, who had been absent from several previous meetings due to his illness, had unexpectedly decided to attend today. But his expression was grim. His face was even paler than usual, his sickly complexion making him look as fragile as a dying ghost. It was clear that something was weighing on him. Just as Uehara Shiroa was settling in, the air suddenly grew heavy.
Thud. The sound of a cane striking the floor silenced the entire room. At the head of the assembly, Yamamoto Genryusai Shigakuni, the unwavering captain commander of the Gotei 13, stood firm. His aged yet powerful voice rang out. The visual department has just sent us urgent intelligence. His eyes swept across the gathered captains, his tone carrying a weight that brooked no argument. The current substitute Shinigami, Jinjo Kugo, has reportedly slaughtered a large number of Fullbringers. A heavy silence followed his words. The name Jinjo Kugo sent a ripple of subtle reactions through the room. Uehara Shirowa's eyes sharpened slightly. So, the Tsuneyashiro family has made its move, huh? Just as he had expected, they were using Jinjo Kugo as a scapegoat to justify their actions against the Fullbringers. In the original history, Jinjo Kugo, feeling betrayed by Soul Society, sought revenge by trying to steal Kurosaki Ichigo's power. The result? Ichigo, in his Fullbring enhanced form, crushed him with overwhelming force, ending his life. What a joke, Uehara thought. A man who was supposed to be Soul Society's first ever recognized substitute Shinigami, turned into nothing more than a scapegoat for the crimes of the Tsuneyashiro. A pure tragedy of injustice. At that moment, Yukitake Jushiro let out a weak cough before speaking. Ahem. I have had the most contact with Jinjo Kugo. I know his character well. He is not the type of man to commit such an atrocity. Could there be a mistake? His voice, though gentle, carried firm conviction. After all, Jinjo Kugo had been the first human officially acknowledged by Soul Society. And Yukitake Jushiro had played a key role in making that happen. If not for his trust and personal recommendation, Jinjo Kugo would have never been granted the status of substitute Shinigami. His trust in the man was unwavering. Kayaraka Shunsui sighed, rubbing his temples before responding. Jushiro, the Tsuneyashiro family has already reached a verdict on this matter. His usual easygoing tone was tinged with subtle disdain. According to their investigation, Jinjo Kugo, who was allegedly a Fullbringer himself, gathered a large group of his kind in an attempt to steal their power. When his plan failed, he massacred them to erase the evidence. His voice grew heavier. The Central 46 has issued an official decree. Jinjo Kugo's substitute Shinigami status is revoked, and a wanted order has been issued for his immediate capture or elimination. Although Kayaraka Shunsui despised the Tsuneyashiro family, he was not the type to blindly trust Jinjo Kugo either. However, upon hearing the involvement of the nobles, especially the Tsuneyashiro, Yukitake's expression darkened. Tsuneyashiro. His hands tightened into fists as he coughed violently, struggling to suppress his emotions. Despite his failing health, he spoke with determined resolve. Jinjo Kugo did form an organization composed primarily of Fullbringers. But that was never about power or control. He took a deep breath before continuing. It was to protect them, to keep them safe from those who would exploit or eliminate them. He would never do something like this. His words hung in the air, but Kayaraka Shunsui remained non-committal. The two old friends were starkly different in their perspectives. Yukitake Jushiro believed in the inherent goodness of people, choosing to see hope and redemption even in the worst individuals. Kayaraka Shunsui, on the other hand, had a more pragmatic, skeptical view of the world. He understood that power and deception often dictated reality. More than 100 years ago, Yukitake had given Tsuneyashiro Tokunada the chance to atone for his crimes, believing that even someone like him could be redeemed. In contrast, Kayaraka had wanted to send him straight to hell, ensuring he could never be reborn. Watching the two of them now, Uehara Shiroa found it all rather amusing. Here were two men, so vastly different in personality. One mature and steady, the other lazy and carefree. One believed in human nature's goodness, the other was a born schemer. One upheld the dignity of warriors, refusing to interfere when his subordinates fell. The other would do anything to protect his people. One carried a power connected to divinity itself. The other wielded a zanpakuto made to oppose divine power. And yet, despite all these differences, they had somehow become the best of friends. Perhaps, at the core of it all, it was because both were willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of Soul Society.
At that moment, Ikemaru-jin lazily tilted his head and asked,
"By the way, what exactly is a Fullbringer?"
Aizen, ever the scholar, adjusted his glasses and responded with a patient tone. Fullbringers are humans who can manipulate spiritual particles and control material souls. Their abilities bear similarities to hollows, allowing them to merge different souls.
He continued.
This is due to their mothers being attacked by hollows while they were still in the womb, infecting them with hollow-like powers. This connection allows them to fuse their own Ryatsu with objects, forming unique spiritual tools, not unlike the Zanpakuto we Shinigami wield. The other captains nodded in understanding.
Only Uehara Shiroa smirked inwardly.
Aizen was lying through his teeth.
The real reason Fullbringers had their powers? The fragments of the Soul King embedded within them.
And Aizen, of all people, knew this very well. It is hard to say whether the other party said this to establish a character or to satisfy some kind of bad taste. Chapter 66, A Maid Who Can Fight Specially.
Kuratsuchi Mayuri's eyes gleamed with a twisted excitement, his entire demeanor radiating unrestrained curiosity.
I had never fully understood how the power of hollows could awaken such strange abilities in humans. His voice was tinged with scientific obsession, his mind already dissecting the possibilities before him. Then, without hesitation, he asked the question that mattered most to him.
Now that we have a case study, where are the corpses?
Kayaraka Shunsui sighed, shaking his head slightly as he answered. They've been detained by the Tsunayoshiro family. His tone was filled with dissatisfaction. The way that Tsunayoshiro family had handled things left a bitter taste in his mouth. They had moved too quickly, taking control of the situation before anyone else had time to react. Had they hesitated even a little, Kayaraku would have made sure those bodies ended up in Kuratsuchi Mayuri's hands instead, if for no other reason than to prevent the Tsunayoshiro from hoarding them. Even with a mask covering his face, Mayuri's displeasure was evident. His posture stiffened as he spat out in frustration.
What a waste! How utterly stupid!
His voice dripped with disdain, his hands twitching slightly at the thought of precious research materials being squandered. Such valuable biological samples should be handled by professionals, not by a bunch of clumsy amateurs who will only ruin them.
Uehara Shiroha nearly chuckled at the irony.
It's hard to say who's really the professional here, he mused silently. After all, Tsunayoshiro Tokikawa had direct access to the fragments of the Soul King. He had even experimented on the Soul King himself.
Compared to that, could Mayuri really claim to be more qualified?
At that moment, Aizen's soft voice cut through the room, carrying a tone of false righteousness.
Captain Kuratsuchi, desecrating another's corpse is an act of profound disrespect. This is not the kind of power we should be seeking.
He spoke gently, his voice carrying the weight of an honorable leader. As the balancers of the three realms, our greatest power is not found in forbidden research, but in our calm minds and tolerant hearts.
Uehara Shiroa almost burst out laughing. Aizen, do you not feel even a little embarrassed saying that? The man who manipulated, betrayed, and murdered countless souls, the same Aizen Sasuke who sought to usurp the Spirit King's throne, was now preaching about morality and balance?
It was almost too much to handle. Kuratsuchi Mayuri, however, had no patience for such nonsense. His disgust was evident as he shot Aizen a sharp glare and snapped. Captain Aizen, spare me the childish idealism. Your words might work on naive recruits, but do not waste them on me. Ikemaru-jin chuckled, his fox-like grin widening as he added.
Still the same as ever, Captain Aizen. Always so, naive.
There was a mocking edge to his words, one that suggested he knew exactly what Aizen was playing at. To others, Jin's casual arrogance made it seem as though he had forgotten Aizen's favor in recommending him for captaincy. But Aizen, ever the perfect actor, didn't even flinch at Jin's sarcasm. Instead, he maintained his gentle smile, reinforcing the image of a calm, rational leader. Kayaraka Shunsui let out a deep sigh, taking a long sip of sake before speaking.
Captain Aizen is really kind-hearted, isn't he?
Though his words sounded admiring, his gaze was filled with deep suspicion, as if he were searching for cracks in Aizen's carefully constructed persona.
Watching this, Uehara Shiroa smirked inwardly. He completely understood why Kayaraku was hesitating.
Even though he had already reached an agreement with Aizen, the man's flawless performance was still unsettling. No matter the situation, Aizen always remained poised, always exuding an air of righteousness.
This level of acting was borderline terrifying.
In truth, the only reason Hirako Shinji ever suspected Aizen in the first place was because of a unique detail, the reaction of his Zanpakuto, Sakanade.
As an illusion-type Zanpakuto, Sakanade would behave oddly whenever it encountered Kyoka Suigetsu. That was the only reason Shinji even questioned Aizen's facade. Without that, he would have fooled them all. For now, though, Uehara Shiroa was content to simply watch the show unfold.
Most of the 13 captains sitting before him were wearing masks of their own, and that was just as amusing to him as anything else. Still, Yamamoto Genryosei Shigakuni had no patience for drawn-out discussions. With a sharp thud, he struck his cane against the ground, bringing the meeting back to order.
Enough!
His deep, commanding voice filled the room, carrying the weight of an absolute decision.
As Captain Commander, I issue the following order. From this day forward, the human known as Jinjo Kugo shall be stripped of his status as a substitute Shinigami.
Furthermore, an official wanted order shall be issued for his immediate capture.
This meeting is dismissed. With that, the matter was sealed. And yet, no captains were assigned to hunt Jinjo Kugo down.
Everyone could see through the old man's intentions. Despite his harsh words, Yamamoto had no desire to spill unnecessary blood.
Uehara Shiroha narrowed his eyes slightly as he glanced in Aizen's direction. Aizen's gaze was thoughtful, calculating. So, even now, he's already considering his future plans against the old man, huh? Uehara wasn't surprised.
Aizen was a man of ambition, after all. And seeing Aizen move forward with his business, Uehara Shiroha figured he shouldn't fall behind either. He already had a clear course of action in mind.
A few days later, Uehara Shiroha turned his attention toward the human world.
He had no interest in Jinjo Kugo or the Soul King fragments, not for the time being.
But he did have an interest in someone else. A specific individual.
The owner of the Seketsu, Soul King binding chain. For days, he monitored the events unfolding in the world of the living.
And then, finally,
on a dark, quiet night, under the sparse glow of streetlights, a blue-haired girl stumbled out of a room, her delicate figure draped in shadows.
As she stepped into the dimly lit streets, a tall man wearing glasses appeared before her.
His expression was gentle. Then, a voice rang out behind her.
"Follow me."
She turned around sharply.
There stood Uehara Shiroha, his presence calm yet absolute.
The girl hesitated for a moment before obediently following him outside. Her voice was soft, confused and uncertain.
"My name is Mishibane. Ora Mishibane."
She looked up at him, her blue eyes clouded with hesitation.
"Do you know my father?"
Her words lingered in the air, a question that carried both innocence and deep-rooted loneliness.
Uehara Shiroha met the girl's gaze, his expression unreadable. "My name is Uehara Shiroha."
Then, in a tone as casual as discussing the weather, he added,
"Unfortunately, your father is dead."
The words were delivered with calm detachment, but Ora Mishibane did not flinch. Perhaps she did not truly comprehend the weight of those words. Instead, she looked around, her blue eyes wide with childlike confusion, as she softly murmured,
"Do you like the world you see?" The question seemed alien to her.
At this moment, Ora Mishibane was not yet the powerful figure she would one day become, not yet the leader of 700,000 devoted followers. Right now, she was just a girl of fragile existence who knew nothing of the world beyond the walls she had lived in.
"What does like mean?" she asked hesitantly. Her voice carried no curiosity, only emptiness. Uehara Shiroha observed her carefully. As a Fullbringer, one's special ability was deeply linked to their favorite object, a manifestation of their spiritual essence.
But Mishibane had no such object. Her mother had died giving birth to her, attacked by a hollow in her final moments. Fearing that she, too, would be hunted, her father had locked her away in a basement, shielding her from the outside world.
Her life had consisted of nothing but isolation and training. She had never formed attachments. Never held something precious. never developed a reason to exist. Her world was a blank slate, and so was her soul. Uehara Shiroa smiled slightly, his tone both reassuring and absolute. It doesn't matter. His voice was calm, unwavering, as if stating an undeniable truth. Even if you don't have something you like yet, as long as you keep moving forward, you'll eventually find something. Just like how I found you at this very moment. He extended his hand slightly, as if offering her something invisible yet vital. That is the meaning of life. So just follow me. As long as you do, you'll never be lost. Mishabane stared at him. Unlike the obvious naivete in the eyes of Rukia or Hinamori Momo, this girl's gaze was different. Her eyes were not innocent, they were empty. Blank. Like a sheet of pure white paper, untouched by the world. A perfect canvas, ready to be painted with whatever colors he chose. Honestly, even a rookie manipulator could take advantage of someone like her. And Uehara Shiroa was far from a rookie. Mishabane lowered her gaze for a moment before nodding. I just don't want you to suddenly disappear. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. Not like my mother. Not like my father. She didn't fully understand death, but she understood loss. Her father's words had drilled fear into her soul, the fear of emptiness, of being abandoned. You don't have to worry about that. Uehara Shiroa's gaze softened slightly. Then, with complete confidence, he stated. I won't die. Aura Mishabane blinked. There was no arrogance or hesitation in his words. He had said it as if it were a fact written into the laws of the universe. Watching the girl carefully, Uehara Shiroa nodded to himself. Right now, she may have seemed like a mere child, but he knew her future potential. Decades from now, she would stand at the pinnacle of power. With her mastery of full bring, she would become an equal to Aizen and Unohana in Bankai form, a formidable force capable of standing against the greatest of Soul Society's elites. It was, of course, due to her exceptional talent. But her true advantage lay in the Seketsu. This unique existence was closely tied to the very essence of spiritual power. Her ability to manipulate Ryatsu surpassed even the most advanced Soul Reapers. She could dissolve into mist, evading nearly all physical attacks, a technique that allowed her to counter even Kyokusu Uegetsu's illusions in the future. And now, this beautiful, powerful, and fiercely loyal girl belonged to him. Not Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada. Not any other schemer in Soul Society. Him. At that moment, a familiar system notification echoed in his mind. A new mission had been triggered. Mission Alert. Special Mission 13, obtain the Enreikioten. Small Blue Diamond Divine Weapons should belong to the virtuous. Small Blue Diamond. The Tsunoyoshiro family is unworthy of possessing an artifact as sacred as the Enreikioten. Small Blue Diamond host, for the sake of justice, claim the Tsunoyoshiro heirloom Zanpakuto. Reward, random ability or item. Uehara Shiroa raised an eyebrow, pleased. Perfect timing. The Enreikioten was no ordinary Zanpakuto. Like the Hakioken, Divine Sword, 8-Mirror Sword, of the Ayase family and Ichibe Hyasube, it was an ancient artifact that existed long before Zanpakuto were ever created. The Enreikioten ability? The power to copy and simultaneously wield all Zanpakuti power it had witnessed. If the wielder had seen Kyokusu Uegetsu, they could use it. If they had seen Senbon Sakura, they could unleash it. Even multiple Shurikai could be activated at once. Its power and versatility were second to none. But it came at a price. Like all Shinken held by the four noble houses of Soul Society, Enreikioten is also a cursed sword which indiscriminately drains away the Ryatsu from its wielder at a steady pace until the owner either relinquishes the sword or they die. Therefore, it can only be wielded by an individual with a strong enough Ryatsu that can stave off the curse long enough to make effective use of the blade. Not an issue for someone with enough trump cards. But the Tsunoyoshiro family having this weapon? Unacceptable. This divine weapon would not belong to them. It would belong to him. With the mission perfectly aligning with his plans, Uehara Shiroa's mood improved. Glancing at Aura Mishabane, he spoke with a casual grin. You must be hungry, right? The girl blinked, hesitating before nodding slightly. Then let's go. Uehara Shiroa turned toward the city lights. It's time for a feast.
As the two of them stepped away, the ghost barrier surrounding the area slowly dissipated.
At the same time, Siriidi's surveillance equipment flickered back to life.
The video hall's monitoring systems resumed normal function.
Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada's rage. Where is that girl? Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada's voice was sharp and seething with rage as he stared at the now empty screen before him. His expression twisted into something almost inhuman, his teeth grinding audibly.
His perfect tool, his flawless pawn, was gone. He had been watching Aura Mishabane for a long time, waiting for the moment when she would break down, when her despair would leave her with no choice but to submit. The moment she stepped outside, he had planned to ensnare her completely.
And yet, she disappeared.
Moments ago, she had been fast asleep in her room under constant surveillance.
But now, vanished.
One of the technicians, his voice trembling, hesitantly reported.
Forgive me, Master Tokunada.
It seems there was a malfunction with our equipment.
We are currently unable to track her location.
The room fell deathly silent.
Then, ha 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 ha.
Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada threw his head back in laughter, his tone both shallow and deranged.
Is that so? Is that how it is?
His shoulders shook as he continued laughing, but his eyes, his crazed, murderous eyes, told a different story.
This world just keeps getting crazier and uglier, doesn't it? The technicians in the room bowed their heads low, their bodies trembling.
None of them dared to speak. None of them dared to breathe too loudly. Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada was a noble, a man of unquestionable authority and power.
To offend him meant only one thing: death. Meanwhile, in the palace of Las Noches, three figures sat together once more: Aizen Sasuke, Tozen Kaname, and Ikemara Jin.
Ikemara Jin, ever the mischievous fox, tilted his head slightly, his usual sly grin in place.
Captain Aizen, the power of the present is also quite impressive.
His tone was casual, but there was an edge of curiosity in his voice.
Aren't you even the slightest bit interested? Doesn't it seem like a waste for such power to be left in the hands of the Tsunoyoshiro family?
At the mention of the Tsunoyoshiro family, Tozen Kaname's frown deepened. His disgust was palpable. Aizen, however, merely smiled, exuding his usual aura of calm superiority. The so-called Foolbringers are nothing more than humans infused with fragments of the Soul King. His voice was smooth and unbothered, as if discussing insignificant trivia. Long ago, the ancestors of the 5 great noble families were the ones who attacked the Soul King, binding him in chains and sealing him into a wedge that maintains the world's balance. His gaze flickered slightly, as if recalling ancient records he had studied in the Great Spirit Book corridor.
They possessed transcendent power, enough to restructure the realms themselves.
And yet, despite their overwhelming might, even they chose not to keep the Soul King's organs for study. He paused, letting his words settle before adding. Instead, they crushed them and scattered the fragments across the 3 realms. Jin narrowed his eyes, his grin widening slightly.
Oh. Now that's interesting.
Aizen chuckled, shaking his head slightly. If the original Tsunoyoshiro ancestor, with all his power, could not comprehend the secrets of the Soul King, then it is even more impossible for the corrupt fools of today's Tsunoyoshiro family to succeed. The ancestor of the Tsunoyoshiro family had been the most radical among the noble houses. Despite possessing immense strength, he had been paranoid and consumed by fear. Especially toward the Soul King's power of annihilation. So he had ensured that the Soul King's fragments were scattered, never to be controlled by one individual. It was then that Aizen had come to a realization. The path of the Soul King is a dead end. If the Soul King's power could be so easily tamed, then he wouldn't be the Soul King. And if even the ancestors of Tsunoyoshiro, those closest to the Soul King's power, had abandoned the idea of wielding it, then there was no value in chasing after it now. And so, Aizen had no interest in Foolbringers. Tozen Kaname's lips pressed into a tight line, his voice heavy with disgust.
This is an unquestionable act of evil.
If he had sight, his eyes would have burned with fury.
The Tsuneyashiro family and their history of sins, this was the true rot within Soul Society. Ikimaro Jin, ever the instigator, hummed in amusement.
Ah, I see. So the 5 great nobles are the original villains here? No wonder my old classmate has such a grudge against them. Then, with a smirk, he added,
Are we really just going to watch?
Aizen cast Jin a knowing look, his expression unreadable. Jin, behind the 5 great nobles stands the Zero Division.
Now is not the time to make our move against them.
His voice lowered slightly, a subtle hint of intrigue creeping into his words.
However,
among the nobles, there may still be individuals worth studying. Perhaps, in their blood, there lingers some unique power. But even as he spoke, he already had his doubts. The 5 noble families were weakening. No true prodigies had emerged from them in years. Take the Shihuan family, for example. If they still had a captain-level powerhouse, would they have allowed Suifeng to take command of the 2nd Division?
No. Their spiritual bloodlines were thinning.
Their glory days were behind them. At that moment, Tozen stepped forward, his voice turning serious.
Our laboratory has been analyzing the residual spiritual pressure left behind by Uehara Shiroa, but we've encountered a discrepancy. There's a 3.9-point anomaly in the data that doesn't match any known patterns at all, the researcher reported, his voice carrying a hint of unease. Furthermore, his freezing ability remains completely untraceable, even with our most advanced instruments designed for monitoring spiritual energy fluctuations. Aizen's expression, usually calm and unreadable, shifted slightly for the first time. He mulled over the report in silence before finally speaking, his voice smooth yet laced with intrigue. So, his abilities exist beyond our understanding. Not a Quincy, not a Fullbringer, not a Hollow, and not a Shinigami. He allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to form at the corner of his lips. Don't you find that fascinating?
To Aizen, the so-called 5 noble families were nothing more than decrepit, rotting wood, vestiges of a decayed system long past its prime.
Their power was illusory, their influence stagnant.
Yet, the emergence of Uehara Shiroa stirred something within him, a rare flicker of genuine excitement. It had been far too long since he had encountered an unknown variable, something that defied expectations. The mere existence of Uehara Shiroa reignited in Aizen a long-dormant sense of anticipation, a thrill he had not felt in years.
Meanwhile, in a hidden base concealed within the human world, Uehara Shiroa was focused on training Mishabane.
Despite her youthful appearance, Mishabane's grasp of the fundamental abilities of a Fullbringer was nothing short of extraordinary. Her level of control over Ryatsu exceeded that of many seasoned fighters, a testament to her innate talent. However, her most formidable skill, the ability to transform her body into Ryatsu at will, was what set her apart. It was a technique reminiscent of Zaraki Futsumi's Bankai, a power that granted an almost elemental state. In many ways, it was similar to the Logio-type abilities found among the so-called devil fruit users, allowing her to become intangible, greatly enhancing her mobility while rendering her immune to most physical attacks. Such an ability was an advanced application of a Fullbringer's core techniques, a level that many Fullbringers could never reach even after years of training. But, of course, every ability had its counter.
This transformation could be completely negated by spiritual energy absorption techniques.
A sufficiently skilled opponent, one who could manipulate or drain Ryatsu, would be able to neutralize her greatest advantage, forcing her into direct combat. And then there was Uehara Shiroa's own power, his stand, White Album.
Against an ability like Mishabane's, White Album was a natural counter.
It could restrain her movements, preventing her from phasing through attacks, effectively rendering her evasive tactics useless. However, at this stage, he had no need to rely on such overwhelming force. There was no reason to unleash his stand against Mishabane, not when she had yet to reach her full potential. This wasn't to suggest that Mishabane was weak, far from it. In fact, most ordinary captains in Soul Society would struggle to find a method to deal with her effectively. Yet, it was undeniable that the so-called the Soul King Seketsu was an absurdly overpowered ability. Reflecting on it, Uehara Shiroa began to understand why someone as contemptible as Tsuneyoshiro Tokunada had managed to stir up so much chaos. The truth was simple, it had nothing to do with Tokunada's own strength or intelligence. It was all because of Mishabane. Without her, Tsunayoshiro Tokunada was nothing more than a pathetic manchild and overgrown buffoon who lacked the power, skill, or intelligence to truly change anything on his own. He was a hollow shell, an empty vessel propped up by borrowed strength, a clown dancing on a stage far too grand for him. And yet, thanks to Mishabane, he had been able to carve his name into history. A truly ironic twist of fate. Chapter 67, and Reikioten is obtained, and the power of observation haki. After all, the prototype of the Tenkai Ketchu from Kasuke Urahara. The Tenkai Ketchu was a device capable of spatial manipulation was stolen by Mishabane. In the future, Mishabane would not only refine her strength but also develop an impeccable temperament and an outstanding figure. Over time, she would transform into a mature, confident, and elegant woman, one who carried an air of superiority, embodying both wisdom and beauty. Beneath the cover of a special barrier that shielded the base from prying eyes, Mishabane panted heavily, struggling to catch her breath. Her body trembled slightly from exhaustion as she knelt on one knee, lowering her head in frustration. "My lord, I'm sorry," she gasped, his voice filled with regret. Her combat experience was sorely lacking, her fighting spirit unrefined. Worse still, she was facing Uehara Shiroa, an opponent whose mere presence suffocated her. Even though Uehara Shiroa had only relied on Hakuta and Shuunpa, his sheer speed and pressure had overwhelmed Mishabane completely. In a battle where raw skill and experience determined the victor, she had crumbled in a matter of moments. Her stamina and Ryuryoko were thoroughly depleted. Uehara Shiroa, observing Mishabane as she gasped for air, gained a deeper understanding of Fullbringer's abilities. In the world of Bleach, everything possessed a soul, every object, every material thing. Fullbringers were unique in that they could tap into these latent souls, fusing their own spiritual energy with them to manipulate matter, awaken abilities, and even move at high speeds. Mishabane possessed a strong foundation. Her control over her abilities was decent, and her physical strength was commendable. However, she had yet to awaken her special Fullbring ability. Against a top-tier powerhouse like Uehara Shiroa, this gap became painfully evident. No matter how much potential she had, she was still just a fledgling. It seems I need to create an opportunity for her to awaken her latent power. As these thoughts crossed his mind, Uehara Shiroa issued his orders in a calm yet commanding tone. "You have talent, but you lack experience in real combat. I'll make sure to arrange an opportunity for you to overcome this weakness." His piercing gaze met Mishabane's. "For now, stay here and wait for my command." Mishabane, despite her exhaustion, showed no hesitation in accepting the order. "Understood, my lord. I will work hard for you." Her voice carried an unwavering determination, a newfound devotion that made her resemble a humanoid AI, an existence driven purely by purpose. Uehara Shiroa knew that Mishabane was still incomplete. She lacked something crucial, a heart. Without one, she could never truly awaken her Fullbring abilities. In the original plot, the reason Mishabane had blindly followed Tsunayoshiro Tokunada was simply because she had no reason not to obey. She was an existence shaped by orders and duty, nothing more. That was the flaw in her very being. Tsunayoshiro Tokunada had deliberately prevented Mishabane from awakening because he feared that, once her abilities matured, she would no longer be easy to control. But Uehara Shiroa had no such concerns. Even if Mishabane were to fully awaken, he had absolute confidence that he could crush her if necessary. More than that, he was certain that he could make Mishabane utterly loyal to him, forging a bond so unshakable that betrayal would become an impossibility. With this decision made, he left Mishabane in the human world. Given that his abilities were still immature, there was no immediate need to bring her to Soul Society. Besides, as long as she didn't do anything reckless, she would be safe. Her current strength was more than enough to keep her out of trouble. Upon arriving in Soul Society, Uehara Shiroa lifted his gaze toward the sky, his mind settling on his next objective, a new special mission. If he had no prior knowledge of Aizen, this mission would have been significantly more challenging. However, with detailed information in hand, it would now be effortless. With his mastery of Kido and his Zanpakuto ability, infiltrating the Tsunayoshiro family's estate and stealing the Enreikioten would be a simple task. A mission like this is the best kind.
The kind I can complete while practically lying down.
Without making a sound, he arrived at one of the forbidden areas within the Tsunayoshiro family's main residence. The Enreikyoten was an ancient artifact with immense power, but its use came with severe side effects. Only those of Tsunayoshiro blood could wield it, and because of these risks, the current head of the family, Tsunayoshiro Tokikawa, had sealed it away instead of keeping it on his person or entrusting it to his subordinates.
It was almost laughable. Even if the entire Gotei 13 were wiped out, these cowards wouldn't dare use it.
The Tsunayoshiro family had grown too comfortable, thriving in luxury and power without true hardship. They had developed arrogance, an unshakable belief that no force could threaten them. They relied too heavily on their name, their status, and the supposed impenetrability of their barriers.
But in front of Uehara Shiroa, these layers of defense were meaningless.
The towering barriers, the spiritual alarms, none of it could stop him.
With ease, he phased through them one by one.
Even the barrier composed entirely of sekiseki, which was supposed to suppress spiritual beings, was nothing more than an illusion of safety. In the end, he arrived at the artifact, the legendary Enreikyoten. He stretched out his hand. With a single gesture, the ancient artifact, something that had been passed down through countless millennia within the Tsunayoshiro family, vanished into the broken space. The security was laughable. No one had noticed his presence. None of the intricate detection spells had been triggered.
The entire mission was a complete success.
Silently, Uehara Shiroa left the forbidden grounds of the Tsunayoshiro family. As he walked through the moonlit night, he glanced back at the extravagant mansion behind him.
So this is the head of the 5 noble families?
He let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. It was no surprise that Tsunayoshiro Tokikawa had been plotted against and assassinated by that clown, Tsunayoshiro Tokunada. The entire Tsunayoshiro bloodline had nearly been wiped out, all because they had mistaken their wealth and name for true power. They had built an empire, watched it rise to towering heights only to see it collapse in an instant. Without strength, all titles, all legacies, and all authority are meaningless.
With that thought, Uehara Shiroa turned away.
His silhouette melted into the darkness of the night, vanishing without a trace. When Uehara Shiroa returned to his mansion on Noble Street, a sudden notification echoed in his sea of consciousness.
Ding!
Congratulations to the host for completing the special mission, 13, obtaining the Enreikyoten.
Reward, A-level ability, Observation Haki.
The moment the notification settled in his mind, a new window of information appeared before him.
Observation Haki. Level, A. Proficiency, Beginner. Type, 3-color Haki. Ability, allows the user to perceive things and energy beyond their line of sight.
When mastered, it can evolve into abilities such as listening to the voices of all things or even predicting the future.
Introduction.
A special sensory ability originating from the world of One Piece.
Gained after completing special mission, obtain Enreikyoten. To master Haki, one must seek out Kaido-sensei. 1 stick for Ryo, Advanced Armament Haki. 2 sticks for Conquer Haki Entanglement. 3 sticks for Devil Fruit Awakening. Observation Haki, huh? Not bad. A faint smirk appeared on Uehara Shiroha's lips as he digested the new ability. Among the 3 types of Haki, each one played a vital role in strengthening a warrior's capabilities. Armament Haki reinforced both offense and defense, allowing its user to clash against even the most formidable opponents. When advanced to its peak, it could even bypass conventional durability and strike directly at an enemy's soul. Conqueror's Haki Entanglement was the pinnacle of dominance, a perfect skill that could obliterate foes without even touching them. Observation Haki, however, was an entirely different beast. The ability to perceive one's surroundings with such clarity provided overwhelming advantages in combat. With a thought, Uehara Shiroa activated Observation Haki, allowing himself to experience its power firsthand. The world around him instantly changed. It was as if his consciousness had expanded, stretching beyond the confines of his physical body. Suddenly, his senses sharpened to an unimaginable degree. He could see everything.
Every particle of dust floating through the air, the swirling movements of Ryatsu, the subtle shifts in energy.
His perception extended outward like a ripple in water. 50 meters. 100 meters. 1,000 meters. In an instant, Uehara Shiroa had extended his observation haki to cover a massive radius of 1 kilometer. The sheer scope of awareness was incredible. If he pushed himself, he could extend it even further, though at the cost of losing some clarity. Still, for conventional combat, this level of perception was more than sufficient. If Ikemara Jin had possessed observation haki of this caliber, he could have played a long-range battle, kiting enemies to death while remaining untouchable. Uehara Shiroa couldn't help but be impressed. I didn't expect the combination of spiritual perception and observation haki to be this broken. He muttered to himself, marveling at the world through this new lens. If Tozen Kanami's world always looked like this, then it makes sense why he used that blindfold. Moreover, this was merely beginner-level observation haki. As his proficiency increased, its range and duration would grow exponentially. At maximum mastery, observation haki could awaken abnormal abilities, at worst, mind reading, and at best, future sight. In the Bleach universe, only a handful of individuals possessed similar perception abilities. Ichigo Kurosaki had an innate ability to sense the emotions of others during battle, allowing him to empathize with even his enemies. Yawatch, the Quincy King, could hear the voices of souls whenever he absorbed the power of a fallen Quincy. He once told the monk, the returning souls cry out in fear. Even in life, they were always afraid of death. Yawatch also sensed the tragic state of the Soul King, an entity neither truly alive nor dead. Compared to those abilities, observation haki had even greater potential. The only reason it was categorized as an A-rank ability was that its full potential needed to be developed over time. Once mastered, Uehara Shiroa's perception ability would easily surpass the vast majority of beings in the Soul Society. Satisfied, he withdrew his expanded perception. Even in its entry-level state, observation haki had already proven to be highly effective. At proficient level, he could likely keep it activated in a small area at all times, a passive enhancement that would prevent any sneak attacks. Coupled with the spatial perception ability provided by his mastery of Shunkyo, even an entity like the Crimson King would be unable to ambush him. Perfect. Turning his attention to the Enreikyoten, which floated silently in the fragmented space of Shunkyo, Uehara Shiroa studied the artifact with a critical gaze. So, this is the divine weapon that has been passed down for millions of years? At first glance, it didn't seem particularly special. Compared to other legendary artifacts, the Enreikyoten lacked an overwhelming presence. The Hakioken were divine weapons designed specifically to counter other gods and divine beings. They were rumored to be capable of striking down even the Soul King himself. Enreikyoten was believed to be the origin of Shurkai, allowing it to synchronize with every Zanpakuto's release state. Ikemanji, the monk's weapon, was the first divine artifact capable of unleashing Bankai. Of course, back in that era, Zanpakuto hadn't even existed, so there was no concept of Bankai yet. The term they used instead was Shinuchi, true blade. Uehara Shiroa suspected that modern-day Shinigami Bankai had actually been inspired by the monk's Ikemanji. Reaching out, he attempted to wield Enreikyoten, finding that while it wasn't entirely unusable, it came with an extreme drawback: it is cursed to drain the Ryatsu, spiritual energy, of its wielder continuously. This relentless depletion persists until the wielder either relinquishes the sword or succumbs to exhaustion, making it a perilous weapon to wield. For an ordinary captain-level Shinigami, this drain was lethal. Even a seasoned Shinigami would collapse after using it only a few times. However, for someone like Uehara Shiroa, who stood at the pinnacle of combat, this was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Still, he wasn't particularly interested in weapons that drained his power unnecessarily. But then, as his gaze shifted toward the mind gem floating nearby in Shunkyo's fractured space, a sudden thought struck him. A spark of inspiration. Wait, if I combine them? His lips curled into a smirk. Now that would be interesting. In the following days, Uehara Shiroa continued with his usual routine, completing daily missions whenever he had free time, studying the Enreikyoten, and occasionally indulging in leisure activities on Flower Street.
Meanwhile, his shadow clones dedicated themselves to intensive training, focusing primarily on observation haki, which he had recently acquired.
Of course, he never neglected the development of his SR-ranked item, the Mind Gem.
This artifact was destined to play a crucial role in his future endeavors, and he fully intended to master its potential.
During this period, the Tsunoyoshiro family was thrown into complete disarray.
The sudden loss of their sacred artifact, the Enreikioten, sent them into a frenzy. Desperate to recover what had been stolen, they dispatched agents far and wide to search for any trace of it. However, for the sake of maintaining their noble reputation, they could not conduct the search openly. Instead, they launched covert investigations under different pretexts, using external conflicts as distractions.
Their primary targets of suspicion? The Shihoin family and Otsutsuki Naruto.
After all, Uehara Shiroa/Otsutsuki Naruto had once demonstrated an ability to become a hollow, leading the Tsunoyoshiro family to believe that Otsutsuki Naruto was responsible for the theft.
And where did Otsutsuki Naruto come from?
The Shihoin family.
From the Tsunoyoshiro family's perspective, this was a betrayal and internal power struggle between noble houses.
However, their suspicions did not intimidate the Shihoin family, especially with Yoshiro now leading them.
With Uehara Shiroha backing him, Yoshiro had nothing to fear.
When confronted, he responded with an expression of sheer innocence, swiftly denying all accusations.
Otsutsuki Naruto? Never heard of him. A masked man? Who? Enreikioten? No idea what that is. 3 consecutive denials, a textbook example of playing dumb.
In the past, Tsunoyoshiro Tokikawa had wielded considerable influence. He had the authority to manipulate minor noble families at will and could even suppress the Shiba clan, one of the 5 great noble families. However, that was because the Shiba clan had long been regarded as outcasts, disgraced by their past actions and their radical ideology. The Shiba family had once dared to challenge the very existence of the Soul King, seeking to rescue the sealed deity from his eternal imprisonment. Their opposition to the other noble houses had left them isolated. As a result, the Tsunoyoshiro family had been able to suppress them with ease. But the Shihoin family was a different story. Unlike the Shiba, they had not abandoned their prestigious standing. They had not relocated to Rukangai, nor had they publicly declared any rebellious ambitions. In the eyes of the Soul Society, they remained one of the 5 great noble clans, respected and untouchable. Even with Tsunoyoshiro influence over the central 46 chambers, they could not simply sanction another noble family without proper cause. If they wanted to take action against the Shihoin, they would need to convene a meeting of the 5 great noble families, a political minefield they were not willing to risk. After all, once they admitted to losing their sacred artifact, the first person to be held accountable would be none other than Tsunoyoshiro Tokikawa himself. Thus, with no other options, he swallowed his anger and intensified the search in secret.
Compared to the Tsunoyoshiro family's frustration, Tsunoyoshiro Tokanada was far worse off.
Alone in his private chamber, his expression twisted into a sinister grin, his laughter echoing ominously.
He.
A cold, unsettling chuckle escaped his lips.
First, the puppet I had my eye on, then Enreikioten.
Very good. Very good. His voice was eerily calm, yet dripping with malice.
Otsutsuki Naruto, you've truly outdone yourself. You ruined all of my plans, you bastard.
Both Enreikioten Nori and Mishabane had been crucial to his grand scheme. And now, both had slipped through his fingers. He suspected that not only Enreikioten but also Mishabane had fallen into Otsutsuki Naruto's hands.
The realization enraged him.
His twisted mind seethed with fury, burning with a deep-seated desire for revenge. He wanted nothing more than to rip Otsutsuki Naruto apart.
Yet, as his emotions settled, a more pressing concern surfaced.
In his obsession with obtaining Mishabane, he had overstepped boundaries. He had been too active, drawing too much attention to himself. Worst of all, he had even infiltrated the forbidden chamber where Enreikioten Nori had been sealed. As long as no one investigated, he was safe. But if the Tsunoyoshiro family dug deeper into the theft, there was a very real chance that he would be blamed for everything. His jaw tightened, his teeth grinding together as he hissed through clenched lips.
Damn you! Otsutsuki Naruto. Sooner or later, I will make you pay the price. Meanwhile, Uehara Shiroha remained utterly unconcerned about the politics of the noble houses.
They were searching for Otsutsuki Naruto, not him.
What did their paranoia and desperation have to do with Uehara Shiroha?
At this moment, he was the chosen successor to the captain commander and the loyal leader of the Seriidii. Instead of worrying about noble squabbles, he was enjoying a pleasant day, instructing two of his adorable female apprentices in the art of combat.
Daily task, teaching and preaching. Daily task, teaching and preaching. It's springtime, the weather is bright and clear.
You decide to train Hinamori, Momo and Rukia while familiarizing yourself with your ever-growing observation haki.
Reward, random attribute points x2.
In the past 3 months, thanks to a combination of daily missions and shadow clone training, Uehara Shiroha's observation haki had advanced to the mastery level. As a result, he could now keep it active at all times, and its effective range had expanded to 5,000 meters. Seated comfortably at the court army training grounds, he watched with amusement as his two apprentices tried to impress him.
Mr. Uehara, how's this strength? Momo Hinamori asked eagerly, her innocent expression filled with expectation. Not too rough, is it?
Beside her, Rukia Kuchiki, looking as serious as ever, was massaging his shoulders and back.
Chapter 68, The Amazing Effect of Observation Haki, Uehara Powerful Teaching Ability. Both girls were highly dedicated to their task, their movements fluid and precise.
It was evident that this was far from their first time. Uehara Shiroha closed his eyes, savoring the experience as a satisfied smile played at the corners of his lips. He gave a slight nod and murmured, "Very good." Whether it was the dazzling, vibrant nightlife or the warmth of such indulgent moments, he truly enjoyed this kind of life. After all, what was the point of living for thousands of years if one spent all their time endlessly training? That would be nothing short of torture. How much more comfortable it was to live like this, relaxing, indulging in pleasure, and relishing each moment. Once the massage was over, Uehara Shiroha turned his gaze toward the two petite figures before him. Their expressions were obedient and respectful, but he knew better. Under his tutelage, both had become far from ordinary. Despite their current docile demeanor, their strength was already nearing that of vice-captains. Moreover, he was well aware that neither Hinamori Momo nor Rukia Kuchiki were as gentle as they appeared on the surface. First, there was Rukia Kuchiki. She was someone who always spoke of upholding the rules of soul society, yet when it came down to it, she had never hesitated to break them. Time and again, she had defied regulations without batting an eye, secretly passing on her Shinigami powers to a human, staying in the human world too long, helping Ichigo invade soul society, using Jigai created by Urahara, defying the Gotei 13 to protect Oraheim, and many more. Ironically, it was Abarirenji, the one who outwardly seemed reckless and free-spirited, who had rigidly adhered to the laws of soul society. He had always been shackled by the prestige of the noble families and Byakuya Kuchiki's authority, weighed down by the sheer pressure of it all. Rukia, on the other hand, had never placed much importance on the noble lineage. Despite being a member of the esteemed Kuchiki family, she had never held her status in particularly high regard. Had it not been for the arrival of Ichigo Kurosaki, she and Rinji would have continued to drift apart, two souls walking separate paths, bound by duty rather than companionship. And then, there was the so-called peach god, Hinamori Momo. At first glance, she seemed like the very embodiment of a naive, love-struck girl and innocent, foolishly devoted soul. However, that impression was largely due to Aizen's manipulations. After all, when someone as intelligent and perceptive as Aizen sets his sights on deceiving you, there's little chance of escape. To be trapped in the palm of such a mastermind was akin to being ensnared by an omniscient puppeteer. Her unwavering loyalty to Aizen had been her greatest downfall, causing her to act with blind devotion whenever he was involved. In those moments, it was as if her mind short-circuited, her rationality drowned beneath layers of deception. Yet, beyond that, Hinamori Momo was no fool. During the travel disaster incident, she had witnessed Abarirenji abandoning his orders, discarding his armband, and fleeing the battlefield. However, she had chosen not to report him, making a conscious decision to protect him from punishment. Later, when Kochiki Byakuya attempted to discipline Rinji for his dereliction of duty, Hinamori openly opposed him without hesitation, standing her ground even in the face of his noble authority. And when she had suspected Ikemara Jin of wrongdoing, she hadn't hesitated to draw her sword against him, fearlessly making her move. Even when Aizen himself betrayed her, when 6 captains stabbed her through the chest, she had refused to break completely. She had endured. In truth, both of his little apprentices were far more formidable than they appeared. If anything, they could be considered a pair of hidden powerhouses, crouching tiger, hidden dragon, as the saying went. Raising and training such disciples was far more rewarding than dealing with ordinary subordinates. The process of guiding them, watching them grow into their full potential, it was fulfilling in a way that few things were. A slight glimmer flickered in Uehara Shiroha's gaze as he regarded them. Noticing his expression, Rukia, the so-called onion head, perked up like an eager kitten, her deep black pupils shimmering like stars. Her voice was earnest, carrying the weight of genuine gratitude. Teacher Uehara, thank you for recommending me as the chief officer of the 13th Division. Byakuya Kochiki's influence had long kept Rukia from rising beyond the rank of an ordinary squad member. Despite her evident strength, she had been unable to advance. But Uehara Shiroha had little interest in pampering Byakuya's pride. He had taken direct action, ensuring Rukia's well-deserved promotion. To her, that recognition meant everything. For as long as she could remember, her identity as the adoptive daughter of the Kochiki family had brought her little happiness. Instead, it had only made her life more difficult. At the Shino Spiritual Academy and even within the 13th Division, she had been an outcast. Whispers followed her wherever she went. The little princess from Rukangai. Some spoke her nickname with derision, others with mockery, but none with warmth. The nobles scorned her for her humble origins, and the common Shinigami shunned her for her noble status. She had no place among them. She had no friends. No true companions. The people she had grown up with, those she had once called family, had long since perished. Even Abarai Rinji, the only person who had once been by her side, had left her behind. Now, at last, their paths had converged again. But for years, they had been walking different roads. And yet, despite all that, the deepest wound had not come from strangers or from Rinji's distance. No, the most painful thing of all had been the cold indifference of her older brother, Kochiki Byakuya. For years, she had pushed herself beyond her limits, desperate to earn his acknowledgement, to prove herself worthy of the Kochiki name. She had trained relentlessly, endured ridicule, and remained steadfast, all in an effort to meet his expectations. And yet, what had she received in return? Is this the adoptive daughter of the Kochiki family? Nothing special. I don't understand why the Kochiki family even bothered adopting her. What a disgrace. She walks around acting so high and mighty. Does she really think she's a princess? How ridiculous. At that time, Rukia had been utterly alone, unable to gain recognition from anyone. No matter how hard she tried, no matter how much she struggled, the world around her remained cold and indifferent. In response, she had closed her heart, shielding herself with apathy, treating everything and everyone with a distant, detached demeanor. But then, Uehara Shiroha had appeared, a ray of light piercing through the darkness that had enveloped her world. Unlike others, he had seen her efforts. He had acknowledged her struggles, taught her invaluable skills, and helped her refine her strength. More than that, he had guided her to understand the concept of heart, the unwavering belief that defined one's existence and purpose. Because of that, Rukia felt immense gratitude toward her teacher. He was someone she admired, someone whose strength and wisdom left her in awe. Hearing Rukia's heartfelt words, Hinamori Momo couldn't help but chime in, quickly stepping forward with eagerness in her voice. "Teacher! Me too! Me too," she exclaimed, her eyes shining with sincerity. "Thank you for your special training. Without it, I wouldn't have been able to save Senior Kanazawa during the mock exam." That moment had been a defining one for her. On that day, she had truly grasped the terror of hollows, the sheer, overwhelming fear that could paralyze even the most determined souls. More than anything, she had come to understand the importance of strength. She had been fortunate, so incredibly fortunate, to have been valued and trained by Uehara Shiroha. If not for his guidance, she never would have been able to protect Hataru Kanazawa, who had been on the brink of death. Nor would she have been able to establish herself within the 5th Division, earning the respect of her peers.
Uehara Shiroha looked at the two innocent girls standing before him.
A small, knowing smile formed on his lips. Then, without warning, he released a sudden burst of spiritual pressure. The sheer weight of it crashed down on them like an unseen force, sending shivers down their spines.
Momo and Rukia's bodies trembled, their minds momentarily overwhelmed by the suffocating intensity of his presence.
In that instant, a long-buried memory resurfaced, one that sent an instinctive fear coursing through them.
The fear of being utterly dominated by Uehara Shiroha.
But just as quickly as that fear took hold, another memory surfaced. The memory of his special training. In order to prepare them for real battles, he had subjected them to merciless training, forcing them to endure intense spiritual pressure and murderous intent. He had taught them not just how to fight, but how to withstand the overwhelming presence of stronger enemies. Because of that, they recovered almost immediately. Their hesitation disappeared, replaced by sharpened instincts. Without wasting a second, they launched a counterattack. Heido number 63, Raikoho. Rukia cast the spell without an incantation, summoning a massive blast of crackling lightning that shot directly toward Uehara Shiroha. At the same time, Hinamori Momo used Shunpa to appear behind him in an instant, her Zanpakuto slashing toward his back. Uehara Shiroha, however, remained completely unfazed. His eyes remained closed, his expression calm as he felt the shifts in their spiritual pressure. With a slight nod, he acknowledged their improvements. You were able to launch a powerful attack without hesitation. Your grasp of heart has deepened.
That's good.
His voice was even, but there was a hint of approval beneath the words.
But he raised a single finger.
A surge of energy erupted from his index finger, shattering Rukia's lightning blast with ease. At the same time, he turned slightly, tapping his finger against Hinamori Momo's Zanpakuto, Tobium. The blade froze mid-air, unable to move forward even an inch. His voice carried a hint of amusement. When facing a strong enemy, you shouldn't attack without reservation.
Rukia and Hinamori's eyes widened as they quickly retreated, using Shunpa to put some distance between them before launching another offensive.
Their determination burned brighter. This was no longer a simple spar, it was a test of everything they had learned. But despite their best efforts, Uehara Shiroha barely needed to exert himself. Even if he only fought at their level of strength, he could still easily overwhelm them. Yet, this was a teaching battle, so he allowed them to continue their attacks, countering only when necessary while pointing out their flaws mid-battle. With his masterful use of observation haki, he effortlessly controlled the pace of the fight, predicting every move they made as if reading them like an open book. No matter how much they struggled, they couldn't break past the reach of his single finger. Standing completely still, he effortlessly deflected every attack, his voice carrying the weight of experience. The Zankinsoki, the 4 fundamental techniques of a Shinigami, may seem basic, but they form the very foundation of your combat ability. Your mastery of them determines your lower limit as a fighter. He continued, his tone firm yet instructive. For you, Shunpa is about evasion and speed. Hakuda and Zanjutsu are about striking. If you can't land a hit with Hakuda and Zanjutsu, then neither your Zanpakuto nor your Kido will be of any use. He sidestepped an incoming attack with minimal movement, countering with another effortless tap of his finger. Kido and Zanpakuto abilities are just advanced applications of spiritual pressure. Mastery of the fundamentals is what allows you to push your abilities beyond their limits. Never neglect that. His words carried immense weight, but his actions demonstrated an even deeper truth. Kayaraka Shunsui, for example, was a prime example of this principle. Despite his seemingly carefree demeanor, his Zankinsoki was unmatched. He rarely needed to fight with full force, using only shallow engagement to gather intelligence on his opponent before delivering a decisive blow. His laid-back attitude was merely a facade, one that allowed him to observe, strategize, and strike when the moment was right. Even the sword god, renowned for his unparalleled swordsmanship, had fallen to such tactics.
This was why Uehara Shiroha never underestimated Zankinsoki. For Rukia and Hinamori, the key to their growth lay in integrating Zankinsoki with their Zanpakuto abilities.
It was the most suitable path for them to reach their full potential. The future was clear, both of them were destined for captain-level strength. And under his guidance, their growth had only accelerated. Their movements became swifter, their strikes more precise. In that moment, they looked like two black butterflies, their petite figures dancing through the battlefield, striking from every angle. Through his observation haki, Uehara Shiroha could sense the determination burning within their spiritual pressure. He nodded to himself, pleased. As expected of his disciples. They were growing stronger again. The so-called heart was, at its core, a belief. It was the foundation of all strength. When one raised their sword against an enemy, they had to truly believe they could strike them down. When one stood to protect another, they had to be prepared to hold their ground, even in the face of death. In a world where souls were bound to all things, belief could manifest as tangible power. It wasn't something that granted instant strength, but it allowed a Shinigami to push their abilities to the absolute limit. If one's heart wavered, their strength would crumble. Now, at last, Rukia and Hinamori had solidified their beliefs. Just as he had once guided Ayase Nanao to master her spiritual pressure and find her own heart, he had done the same for them. This was only the beginning. The foundation of their strength had been laid by Uehara Shiroha. Their paths, too, were forever marked by his influence. But at this moment, neither Rukia nor Hinamori felt victorious. Instead, they felt utterly powerless. They had tried everything. Yet, with his eyes closed and using only a single finger, Uehara Shiroha had never even moved a step. The difference in strength was so vast that neither Rukia nor Hinamori could fully comprehend it. They had always known their teacher was strong. Far beyond the level of an ordinary captain. They had even heard the stories of him defeating 3 captains single-handedly. At the time, they had felt nothing but admiration and shock, celebrating his victory without truly understanding the depths of his power. They had imagined what battles at the captain level must be like, picturing the upper limits of strength based on what they had witnessed in Soul Society. But now they had caught a glimpse of something terrifying, something beyond anything they could have ever imagined. This was not just the strength of a captain. This was the terrifying iceberg of Uehara Shiroha's unfathomable power. And they had only seen the tip of it. Finally, exhausted and drained of energy, Rukia and Hinamori exchanged glances before stopping their movements. Gasping for breath, they lowered their weapons, sweat dripping from their foreheads. Then, in unison, they spoke. "Mr. Uehara, we can't go on anymore." "Sorry to disappoint you." Uehara Shiroha chuckled lightly, his expression remaining as calm as ever. "Go back and train your Hakuto more. You need to build up your physical endurance." Despite their exhaustion, his approval came next. "But, it seems you've remembered what I've taught you." "That's good." His gaze softened ever so slightly. "Now, tell me, what reward do you want?" The classic method of rewarding students after rigorous training was a simple yet effective teaching strategy. The idea of giving a sweet treat after a beating was something many instructors used, and Uehara Shiroha was no exception. Just as he spoke, the notification of his daily training rewards arrived. His proficiency in Zanjutsu and Hakuta had each increased slightly, pushing him another step closer to reaching the legendary Millennium Captain level. That alone was enough to leave him feeling somewhat expectant. At the mention of a reward, Rukia's eyes suddenly lit up as if she had just remembered something important. Excitedly, she pulled out a piece of drawing paper and looked up at Uehara Shiroha with hopeful anticipation. "I drew something to express my gratitude. I hope you can give me your advice on it." The moment Uehara Shiroha saw her expression, he immediately knew what this was about. The soul painter was itching to create again. Instead of taking the drawing paper, he simply gave Rukia a gentle but pointed look. His voice remained relaxed, but there was an unmistakable warning in his tone. "Rukia, let me make something clear right now." He narrowed his eyes slightly. "If you've drawn me as Chappie again, you already know what the consequences will be.
At that moment, Rukia's body instinctively tensed. She subconsciously covered her, but as a wave of nervousness washed over her. Then, letting out an awkward laugh, she quickly retracted her masterpiece with a sheepish smile. However, there was unmistakable regret in her eyes. What a pity! With the teacher's support, she had the perfect chance to join the prestigious painting association. If she could enter, then the world would finally recognize the undeniable cuteness of Chappie. Seeing Rukia's exaggerated reaction, Hinamori Momo burst into laughter. The carefree atmosphere was infectious, and soon, the tension from their earlier battle dissipated. At this moment, she was truly satisfied with her life. She had witnessed the cruel reality of soul society firsthand. She had seen betrayals, death, and destruction. But despite it all, she felt no fear, no hesitation, because the man before her was someone she could always rely on. Finally, Uehara Shiroa rewarded them in the simplest yet most effective way, a light head pat kill each, ruffling their hair like a doting elder brother. Then, with his 2 exhausted disciples, he took them out for a lavish meal. It was, without a doubt, a fulfilling and enjoyable day. Nightfall. As the sky darkened and the world fell into silence, Uehara Shiroa sat alone in an empty space, focusing entirely on his next project. The development of the Mind Gem. Over time, his control over the gem had deepened, and as a result, he had begun unlocking even more of its hidden potential. As one of the greatest treasures in existence, capable of shaking even transcendence and pseudo-spirit king-level beings, the Mind Gem was an absolute trump card against ordinary captains. Yet, for Uehara Shiroa, simply wielding its power was not enough. He sought to fully integrate its capabilities into his own fighting style, refining and mastering it to its utmost limits. Holding the gem in his hand, he channeled his mental energy and spiritual pressure into it, allowing its power to flow outward. Suddenly, a vast, invisible force surged through the space around him. It was as if the very fabric of reality itself had shifted. The once still and lifeless air was now filled with an indescribable rhythm, a steady pulse, like the heartbeat of the universe itself. Even the sky above had subtly changed. If one looked closely, they would notice faint, wispy clouds that hadn't been there before. Uehara Shiroa gazed upward, quietly sensing the strange, magical shift in the atmosphere. He nodded in satisfaction. This was proof that the Mind Gem had begun to leave an imprint upon the world. The abilities of Zanpakuto, whether in Shurkai or Bankai, were not static. As a Shinigami's strength grew and their understanding deepened, their Zanpakuto would evolve alongside them. Kayaraka Shuunsue's Shurkai, for example, held 5 different abilities. His Bankai, too, consisted of multiple dramatic scenes, each one bringing forth a different level of devastation. The same applied to Ryujin Jaka Yamamoto's Bankai, Senka no Tachi, from 1,000 years ago, and the one wielded in the present were like 2 entirely different weapons. Everything depended on development. Even something as simple as Kibun's Zanpakuto had initially only been able to transform into a nunchaku with a spear tip. It was undeniably cool, but ultimately limited. However, through the influence of an insect arrow, Silver Chariot had instantly evolved into Silver Chariot Requiem, becoming a world-destroying level stand. And now, for Uehara Shiroa, the Mind Gem was his insect arrow. It was a catalyst that could elevate everything: his stand, his Zanpakuto, and every other skill or technique he possessed. With the Mind Gem, the limitations that once bound him were no longer absolute. Even his very foundation could be strengthened beyond its previous limits. Chapter 69: The Terrifying Power of the Mind Gem. The reason Vision had been able to exist in the first place was due to the sheer power of the Mind Stone, a force capable of creating both life and consciousness. And in the idealistic world of the dead, where souls and consciousness were the strongest forces, such power was even more overwhelming. Just as he had theorized before, in this world where everything possessed a soul and a will, the Mind Stone was far too powerful. Uehara Shiroa turned his gaze toward the Enreikyoten, the ancient artifact floating within the fragmented void of a broken dimension. His eyes gleamed with intrigue. Let's see what happens when I take this a step further. With a single thought, he activated the Mind Stone once again. A surge of mental energy radiated outward, piercing into the very consciousness of the Enreikyoten. And in that instant, he saw something bizarre.
At first, there was only white, a vast, endless whiteness stretching beyond comprehension.
Then, as if responding to his intrusion, the whiteness began to shift.
It churned, twisted, and exploded into a myriad of colors, surging like a wild, living force. Uehara Shiroa could feel it, the immense power contained within these colors.
This was no ordinary energy.
This was the very source of the Enreikioten's consciousness. The artifact had existed for millions of years, its essence infused with such deep-rooted spiritual authority that it was on the verge of evolving into immortal energy.
An ocean of incomprehensible might.
A force so vast, so ancient, that shaking it was nearly impossible.
But Uehara Shiroa was not deterred.
In his eyes, the Tsuneyashiro family had wasted the potential of this artifact for far too long. Their use of the Enreikioten had been crude, a shallow, ineffective display of its true power. To them, it was merely a treasured heirloom.
To Uehara Shiroa, it was a goldmine of opportunity.
With the Mind Stone, the Enreikioten was his to wield. And so, he began his work. Using the Mind Stone's influence, he carefully reached out, touching the immense source power within the artifact. The more he practiced, the stronger his control over both the Enreikioten and the Mind Stone became.
Yes. This is it. Uehara Shiroa felt that the time had come.
It was time to put these artifacts to the test, to see just how much Infinity Stones could alter the world of death itself.
The night was dark and silent as Uehara Shiroa arrived at the Tsuneyashiro branch mansion with effortless ease.
This estate, though smaller than the main Tsuneyashiro mansion, was still a symbol of wealth and status. Sprawling courtyards, luxurious golden rooftops, and intricately designed pathways stretched as far as the eye could see. But Uehara Shiroa had little interest in the grandeur of this place. With quiet, measured steps, he made his way toward a particular residence, one that, at first glance, seemed less extravagant compared to the other noble dwellings.
However, with his observation haki, he immediately sensed the layers of intricate barriers surrounding it.
But rather than be deterred, he simply walked through them as if they were nothing more than mist in the air. He lifted the spiritual barrier that concealed his presence, making no effort to hide himself. And at that moment, inside the dimly lit chamber, a man finally took notice of him. The gorgeously dressed figure turned his head, narrowing his eyes at the masked intruder. A sneer curled at his lips.
A sneaky bastard hiding behind a mask, you dare appear before me, Tsuneyashiro Tokunada?
His voice was low, condescending, but there was an edge of cautious arrogance in his tone. In his hand, he clutched a spatial artifact, one that could allow him to teleport away at a moment's notice. Just like a soul-communicating talisman, this treasure served as an emergency escape tool, ensuring that no matter what happened, he could flee at any time. Tsuneyashiro Tokunada, his long, dark green hair flowing past his shoulders, was clad in a lavish yellow robe, adorned with ornate noble decorations. Beneath that, however, was a white Shinigami uniform, and at his waist hung a sharp zanpakuto. His face bore an uncanny resemblance to Ikemaru Jin, a snake-like smirk, eerily unsettling. But unlike Ikemaru Jin, his eyes were wide open. And the way he constantly wore that arrogant, self-important grin was enough to make anyone irritated at first glance.
But Uehara Shiroa barely spared him a glance.
Instead, he scanned the room, taking in his surroundings before speaking casually.
Hello, Tsuneyashiro Tokunada. You can call me Otsutsuki Naruto. Tsuneyashiro Tokunada's lips twitched. Otsutsuki Naruto?
His smile didn't falter, but there was a flicker of recognition in his gaze.
Ah, I've heard of that name before.
Uehara Shiroa calmly met his gaze, his expression unreadable.
Oh? Then it's my honor.
His voice was utterly indifferent.
In that case, you should already know why I'm here. Tsuneyashiro Tokunada's smirk widened. It doesn't matter what your intention is, he scoffed. Because in the end, you're finished either way.
There was madness in his eyes as he continued.
Who do you think you are? To lay your hands on the sacred artifact of the Tsuneyashiro family? Do you even understand how noble we are?
His tone became almost hysterical, his voice laced with arrogance and insanity.
He spoke of the Tsuneyashiro name as if it were something to be worshipped, yet there was something off about his expression.
Beneath his praise, there was an unmistakable mockery. His smile never faded, but his eyes revealed something darker.
He wasn't just looking down on Uehara Shiroha. He was looking down on everything in this world.
A man who claimed nobility, yet held nothing but contempt for the very thing he boasted about.
A lunatic. A clown. And to Uehara Shiroha, he was not even worth taking seriously.
His voice remained calm as he replied, "Of course, your family is very noble, so noble, in fact, that you stand above even the Spirit King himself." A slight smirk played at his lips.
After all, your ancestors were the ones who defeated the Spirit King, weren't they? Should I be giving you a round of applause? Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada's grin widened. Ah ha 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 ha.
He laughed loudly, his expression growing even more deranged.
You know about that? Amazing. Truly amazing.
His voice was thick with mad amusement. This world, this entire world is built on original sin. His golden eyes gleamed as he leaned forward.
I see now. You're not boring at all. He chuckled. Why don't you join me?
His voice lowered, becoming almost seductive.
Help me control the Tsunoyoshiro family. My tool, Ora Mishabane, is already in your possession, isn't she?
Then, with a dismissive wave of his hand, he added.
Ah, but it doesn't matter. They're just lowly humans, insignificant, disposable.
His smile sharpened.
But the Enreikioten, the artifact you hold, is something I need. What good will it do me to help you?
A trace of disdain flashed through Uehara Shiroha's eyes. This lunatic, a man who only wanted to see the world burn, was far too easy to manipulate.
There was no challenge in it, no difficulty at all.
Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada, however, interpreted his hesitation differently. In his mind, Otsutsuki Naruto was a man of ambition, someone who, like himself, could never resist the temptation of power, fame, and wealth.
And people like that. They could always be controlled.
His confidence swelled, his smirk widening, as he began to delude himself into believing that he had the upper hand. But what he failed to notice, what he was too blind to see, was the faint glow of the mind gem resting in Uehara Shiroha's hand. A power beyond his comprehension was already at work.
Inside the dimly lit room, a silent confrontation was taking place. Uehara Shiroha remained calm, watching as Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada's arrogance gradually returned. The nobleman, convinced of his own superiority, sneered as he spoke. Are you really trying to negotiate with me?
He scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. I am the future head of the Tsunoyoshiro family.
You are nothing.
His expression, his tone, even his very posture exuded arrogance so deeply ingrained that it had become second nature. But beneath it all, his madness was just as apparent. This man was beyond reason.
Uehara Shiroha sighed, shaking his head. People like you.
His voice was almost disappointed.
You can't even be reasoned with.
The mind gem had already taken full effect. It had warped Tokunada's thoughts, embedding a single, unshakable delusion in his mind.
That only by working with Uehara Shiroha could he obtain the Enreikioten and achieve his goals.
But even with this false conviction, the man still couldn't see the hierarchy of power. He was still too arrogant to understand that he was not the one in control.
What a fool! But it didn't matter. In the end, he was just a tool.
It made no difference how warped his mind was, his purpose remained unchanged.
Since reason wouldn't work, there was only one logical alternative. Beat him until he understands.
Uehara Shiroha slowly lifted his gaze, his eyes radiating undeniable pressure as he spoke.
I want to see.
His voice was slow, deliberate. If the future head of the Tsunoyoshiro family is truly as strong as he claims to be.
Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada sneered. Typical. The lowborn only know how to resort to violence.
His tone was mocking, but there was an undeniable edge to it. Don't underestimate the Tsunoyoshiro family, he continued, his voice laced with arrogance.
And certainly, don't underestimate me.
He smirked. While you've been playing your little Shinigami games,
I've been growing stronger every single day. The moment he finished speaking, Otsutsuki Naruto vanished. Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada's instincts flared. Instantly, he drew his blade, spinning around to slash behind him. In his mind, the masked man was nothing more than a coward, a sneaky assassin who relied solely on his Zanpakuto-S abilities. If the man truly possessed real strength, why would he hide behind a mask? He must be young. Probably no more than a few hundred years old. And I am of noble blood, backed by thousands of years of accumulated power. How could I lose? With that certainty in mind, he swung his blade. 1,000 years of noble swordsmanship. A strike that should have been absolute. The silver arc of his attack illuminated the room like snowfall, cutting through the air with deadly precision. And then, the blade struck its target. A sharp edge slicing through flesh. Blood splattered. Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada's lips curled into a triumphant smirk. He had won. Just as expected. A shame, he murmured, voice filled with mock pity. This is what happens when you dare to offend the Tsunoyoshiro family. His smirk widened. Lowly creatures like you will never be able to lay a single finger on me. But before he could finish his sentence, the body before him vanished. A mere illusion. The smile on his face froze. A split second later, a crushing force slammed into his chest. His body flew backward, slamming hard against the floor. A sharp pain shot through his ribs. He barely had time to react before the impact forced blood from his mouth. Coughing violently, he struggled to regain his breath. His mind reeled. What just happened? For the first time, Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada felt something foreign, something he had never experienced before. Panic. Who am I? Where am I? Did I just lose? He had barely adjusted his breathing when his gaze lifted, landing on the figure sitting at the table. Uehara Shiroa. Perfectly calm, his posture relaxed, as if nothing had even happened. There wasn't a single scratch on his body. It was as if Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada's attack had never even existed. His mind raced, trying to replay the events, trying to pinpoint exactly when and how he had been defeated. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find the answer. His spiritual perception had detected nothing. His eyes had seen nothing. He had never lost this badly. He had never been this confused. This wasn't just a defeat. It was a complete and utter annihilation. How? Who was this man? Could it be? His mind raced through possibilities. A member of the Royal Guard? A secret weapon of Soul Society? An anomaly beyond his understanding? But the most terrifying thing. Uehara Shiroa had never even moved from his seat. And now, for the first time in his entire life, Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada was no longer the proud, arrogant noble he had once been. At this moment, he looked no different from a defeated dog. Uehara Shiroa's voice was calm, almost indifferent, as he looked down at the defeated noble. This was just a small lesson, he said, his tone devoid of sympathy. You won't be so lucky next time. Get on your knees. The 5 great noble families? Nothing special. From beginning to end, Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada had been nothing more than a puppet, dancing under the influence of the mind gem without ever realizing it. Disrupting consciousness itself, this power was even more terrifying than Kyokusuagetsu. After all, Kyokusuagetsu could only create illusions that could still be dispelled if one recognized inconsistencies or relied on alternative methods of perception. For example, Unohana Retsu, with her intimate familiarity with corpses from centuries of battle and her unparalleled medical expertise, had been able to notice the unnatural state of Aizen's corpse, a flaw in the illusion. But when it came to the mind gem's influence, there was no flaw to find. No inconsistencies. No room for doubt. Once the mind itself was altered, there was no way to resist. Not even instincts or battle-hardened perception could break free. This was absolute. Unsolvable. Tsuneyoshiro Tokunada's face twisted, his expression a grotesque mix of rage and disbelief.
His fingers trembled as he clenched them into fists, his breath heavy with seething hatred. Aside from Kayaraka Shunsui, he had never hated anyone as much as he hated the man before him.
The anger in his chest burned like a volcano on the verge of eruption.
But despite the fury surging through his veins,
he couldn't do anything. He couldn't fight back. He couldn't even run away.
Without Enrikioten, his carefully laid out plans had crumbled before they could even begin. And so, he had no choice but to bow his head.
But this humiliation, this indignity, would not be forgotten.
He would have his revenge. No one could humiliate the Tsuneyoshiro family and live to tell the tale.
Once he reclaimed Enrikioten, he would erase this bastard from existence. And when that time came, Kayaraka Shunsui and Otsutsuki Naruto would burn together.
Tsuneyoshiro Tokunada lowered his proud head, his tone carefully disguised as one of reluctant submission. "I admit my loss this time," he said smoothly. "As long as you hand over Enrikioten and help me take my rightful place as head of the Tsuneyoshiro family, I will grant you whatever you desire."
His voice oozed with persuasion, the air of a man who knew how to make deals. How does that sound? A fair proposal, isn't it? Uehara Shiroa wasn't fooled. He could see right through him. After all, Tsuneyoshiro Tokunada was only following the script he had been given. This so-called future head of the Tsuneyoshiro family believed he was playing a game of manipulation. But in reality, he was nothing more than a pawn moving exactly as Uehara Shiroa had orchestrated. And so, Uehara Shiroa remained completely unfazed, his voice as calm as ever. "Enrikioten," he echoed, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "No rush. First, I want to see some sincerity from you." After all, the Tsuneyoshiro family had plenty of valuable treasures. And Uehara Shiroa wasn't about to let this golden opportunity go to waste. Tsuneyoshiro Tokunada suppressed his gritted teeth and forced his voice to remain composed. "Fine," he said, keeping his tone smooth. "What do you want?" He hid his true intentions well. All he needed was Enrikioten. With that, he could wipe out the rest of the Tsuneyoshiro family in one fell swoop and secure his position as the sole heir. Once he became the head, he would have the power to convene the 5 noble families, activate the ancient agreement, and impose their will upon the Zero Division itself. With their backing, he could bend Soul Society to his will. And once that happened, he would be unstoppable. But Uehara Shiroa's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "I want control of the visual department." Tsuneyoshiro Tokunada froze for a fraction of a second. Then, he laughed. Oh, how ironic. His plans, his ambitions, his entire grand scheme. And here was this masked man, asking for something as small as the visual department. How utterly short-sighted. But of course, he wasn't going to refuse. Very well, he agreed immediately, flashing a sharp, knowing grin. He had already taken control of the visual department long ago. But to him, that department was no longer crucial. As long as he obtained Enrikioten, he could wipe the slate clean at any time. This minor trade meant nothing to him. This department would only be temporarily in Uehara Shiroa's hands. Sooner or later, it would return to him. But Uehara Shiroa. He wasn't concerned with the other man's little schemes. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable. Good. Then we have an agreement. Their words seemed pleasant, their exchange one of mutual understanding. But beneath the surface, their thoughts were identical. Die, bastard. Die, clown. With Tsuneyoshiro Tokunada's cooperation, Uehara Shiroa quickly seized control of the visual department. The nobleman handed over various classified orders and methods of command without hesitation. With those documents alone, even an idiot could oversee the entire operation. But Tokunada wasn't worried. As long as his plan succeeded, reclaiming the visual department would take mere minutes. In his mind, he was only lending it out temporarily. But Uehara Shiroa knew better.
The fate of Tsuneyoshiro Tokunada and the Tsuneyoshiro family had already been sealed. They were all simply playing their parts in a script he had written.
1 week later, Uehara Shiroa made his move.
He handed over the entire visual department to the Gotei 13.
And no one, not a single soul,
had expected that the Tsuneyoshiro family's most powerful surveillance agency would suddenly change ownership overnight.
Chapter 70, Aizen's Hueco Mundo Plan, The Mysterious Thief.
What made this situation even more absurd was that the one who orchestrated it all, the man who had seized control of the visual department, wasn't even a member of the 5 great noble families.
With the visual department under his command, things had become much easier for both the Gotei 13's court army and Uehara Shiroa himself.
However, despite having gained this significant leverage, Uehara Shiroa did not immediately hand over Enriki Oten to Tsuneyoshiro Tokunada.
The time wasn't right yet. He needed to wait. Tokunada had not suffered enough. He had not despaired enough. The scene was not dramatic enough, not yet. And so, Uehara Shiroa was simply biding his time.
There was no rush. After all, his life had become increasingly comfortable as of late.
No endless work hours. No unnecessary troubles. He was steadily growing stronger with minimal effort. Life was good. So, why hurry?
On this particular day, Uehara Shiroa was leisurely strolling through Rukangai, humming softly to himself. Suddenly, the system prompt appeared before his eyes. Congratulations on completing your daily task, strolling through Rukangai.
Rewards, +1 Ryatsu, +1 Hakuda.
Ah, perfect.
The moment the notification popped up, Uehara Shiroa felt a subtle shift within himself.
It was as if something had clicked into place, his Ryatsu had subtly strengthened, and his control over Hakuda had become even sharper.
It was a pleasant yet effortless improvement. And then,
a gentle, fragrant breeze brushed past him. A figure approached, her presence radiating warmth and confidence. It was a stunning blonde beauty, her curves accentuated by the way she moved with effortless allure. A single black beauty mark at the corner of her mouth only added to her charm.
It was none other than Matsumoto Ranjaku, the vice-captain of the 10th Division.
Her signature playful smirk was already in place as she sauntered up to him. Her voice was silky and teasing, carrying a seductive undertone.
Commander Uehara, long time no see.
She tilted her head, her golden locks cascading over one shoulder.
Would you like to have a drink with me?
She gestured toward a nearby establishment, a mischievous glint in her eyes. There's a hot spring bar just around the corner, she added in an alluring whisper.
It's really great.
Then, as if deliberately emphasizing her point, she leaned in slightly, her breath warm against his ear.
It doesn't matter if you get drunk. She giggled. Because we can play fun games together. Uehara Shiroa's eyes flicked downward. With the way Matsumoto Ranjaku was leaning forward, her loose Shinigami uniform could barely contain her proud, ample curves. If he just lowered his gaze, he would be staring straight into an abyss far deeper than any Hollow's Garganta. This woman is dangerous. Uehara Shiroa's mind acknowledged the trap. But outwardly, his expression remained completely composed. Let's go. A spark of playfulness danced in his eyes. This blonde vixen might have looked mature, but mentally, she was just an 8-year-old brat who would happily dive headfirst into trouble the moment someone gave her an opening. She needs to be taught a lesson. Hot Springs Bar, Rukangai. The steam rose gently, curling into the air like soft, silken threads. Matsumoto Ranjaku stretched her arms, letting out a contented sigh as she sank deeper into the warm water. Ah, this is so nice, she murmured lazily. Her glistening skin, partially submerged in the hot spring, was on full display, her damp, golden hair sticking to her shoulders in enticing waves. She made no effort to conceal the voluptuous curves that even her loosened shihakusho could barely contain. Ripples spread through the water as she turned to face him, her bright blue eyes filled with mirth. Don't you think so, Commander? Across from her, Uehara Shiroa leaned back against the edge of the spring, his jade-like skin glowing slightly under the steam.
His eyes remained half-lidded, his demeanor completely relaxed.
Yeah, he said lazily. It's not bad. Despite being just a simple hot springs tavern in Rakangai, the service here was impeccable.
Young women in elegant kimonos moved gracefully between the wooden platforms, tending to guests with polite smiles and refined etiquette.
The water temperature was just right, its gentle warmth easing the tension from one's muscles.
And now, two young and beautiful maids approached, balancing wooden trays in their hands.
With synchronized precision, they placed the trays on the water's surface, revealing an assortment of exquisite delicacies and several bottles of premium sake. Matsumoto Ranjiku grinned, lifting a small sake bottle.
"Cheers," she said, raising it toward him.
Uehara Shiroa accepted, taking a slow sip. The sake was decent. Not the best, certainly not up to Hanamachi Street standards, but for Rakangai, it was top tier. Matsumoto Ranjiku, on the other hand. She gulped down half a bottle in seconds.
Uehara Shiroa barely finished his first sip before she had already moved on to the second one.
"Oi," he raised an eyebrow, "you're drinking way too fast." Matsumoto Ranjiku pouted. "Hey, a beautiful woman is drinking with you, and you're not even excited?" Her eyes shimmered mischievously, her skin slightly flushed from the alcohol.
She looked like a perfectly ripened fruit, tempting, luscious, and inviting. But her tone, her playful words and actions, were childish, almost innocent.
Uehara Shiroa chuckled internally.
This woman, she really hasn't changed at all. Their first encounter had been almost exactly like this.
Same setting.
Same flushed cheeks and teasing gaze.
And, of course, same reckless drinking. The irony? Despite her bold, flirtatious nature, Matsumoto Ranjiku was one of the purest souls he had ever met. She wasn't pretending to be innocent. She truly was innocent. The only downside: she was extremely clingy. Uehara Shiroa sighed, mentally preparing himself for the inevitable. But before he could speak, Matsumoto Ranjiku grinned mischievously.
She playfully nudged him under the water with her crystal-clear toes.
"Why so quiet?" she teased. "Are you not man enough, Commander?" That was it. A predatory gleam flashed in Uehara Shiroa's eyes. In one swift motion, he stood up like a tiger, swooping forward to scoop Matsumoto Ranjiku into his arms.
The blonde beauty squealed in laughter, wriggling as she playfully protested. "You brought this on yourself," he murmured with a smirk. The next morning, 10th Division. When Matsumoto Ranjiku returned to her squad, the entire 10th Division immediately noticed something different. Their vice-captain was absolutely radiant.
Glowing skin. Sparkling eyes. A noticeably good mood. Even the female Shinigami couldn't help but ask, "Ranjiku-san, what skincare are you using? Why do you look so refreshed?" Matsumoto Ranjiku simply smiled. Half a month had passed.
Inside Las Noches, within the Grand Palace, Sasuke Aizen sat upon his throne, nodding in satisfaction as he observed the newly promoted Espada standing before him.
Each of them radiated pride and power, their once masked hollow forms now bearing the refined appearance of Arrancar. And yet,
despite their newfound strength, they all looked upon Aizen with awe and reverence, like loyal subjects gazing up at a god. The Segunda Espada, Picaro, stood silently, his expression cold and unreadable. He kept his gaze lowered, never daring to meet Aizen's eyes directly.
The Tercera Espada, Dordoni Alessandro del Sacaccio, bore a striking resemblance to Dracul Mihawk with his distinguished beard.
His presence exuded heroic confidence, and his loyalty to Aizen was etched into every fiber of his being.
The Quinta Espada, Sandovici, was a petite yet captivating woman.
Her piercing gaze burned with an intensity that bordered on obsession as she looked at Aizen. The Septima Espada, Mosca, stood with his arms crossed over his chest, his face twisted into a defiant scowl, exuding an air of unchecked arrogance. As for the Cuarta Espada, Paid, and the Sexta Espada, Neros.
*TL, I think this is not from the anime, but the prototype so the Espada is different from the one that will form in the future. I think it's because most of them still defy Aizen and not fully join.
They were unique among the Espada, their existence shaped by specialized experimentation. Unlike the others, they had been the first to undergo the transformation into Arrancar, serving as prototypes in Aizen's grand design. From a distance, Ikemaru Jin observed the scene, a knowing smile gracing his lips. He had long since grasped Aizen's true thoughts. These so-called espada, for all their power and bravado, were nothing more than disposable test subjects. No matter how loyal they appeared, Aizen did not see them as anything more than stepping stones. They were inferior prototypes, imperfect failures who were merely filling the ranks until the true Arrancar army could be perfected. And the moment that happened, these proud warriors standing before Aizen today would be cast aside like trash. Such was the fate of expendable pawns. After the formal Espada assembly concluded, Aizen, Ikemaru Jin, and Tozen Kaname gathered for their private discussions, a routine meeting where true plans were set in motion. Tozen was the first to report. Lord Aizen, he began, his voice even yet weighted with meaning, there have been unusual disturbances within the visual department in the Tsunoyoshiro family as of late. His blind eyes narrowed slightly. It is said that the sacred heirloom of the Tsunoyoshiro family has been stolen. From what we've gathered, it appears that Uehara Shiroa has already taken action against them. Tozen had been closely monitoring Uehara Shiroa's movements. But despite his efforts, he had found nothing suspicious. If it weren't for Aizen's insistence that Uehara Shiroa was actually Otsutsuki Naruto, even Tozen himself might have begun questioning their original assessment. However, the theft of a Tsunoyoshiro artifact was undeniable. And there was only one person in Soul Society capable of such a feat. Otsutsuki Naruto. Aizen's lips curled slightly as he turned to Tozen. Kaname, he said smoothly, this is good news for you, isn't it? Tozen's fingers twitched slightly, but his voice remained composed. Lord Aizen, he said, bowing his head, I will not allow personal hatred to interfere with the greater cause. His dedication to justice ran so deep that it bordered on paranoia. Despite his seething hatred for Tsunoyoshiro Tokunada, he had restrained himself, choosing not to act against his sworn enemy. On one hand, it was to maintain the integrity of their grand plan. On the other, it was to prove that his actions were born of justice, not revenge. Watching this display of conviction, Ikemaru Jin, who had been listening in silence, let out a casual chuckle. Well, he mused, that's certainly interesting. His smile widened. It's terrifying, really. Uehara Shiroa stole the Tsunoyoshiro family's sacred artifact without even making a sound. His voice dropped slightly, as if feigning concern. With that artifact in his hands, he's going to be even more troublesome to deal with. Then, his eyes glinted with mischief. Lord Aizen, are you sure it's a good idea to let him continue growing stronger? Aizen's expression remained unshaken. Jin, he said with absolute certainty, there is nothing to be concerned about. His calm, golden eyes radiated the confidence of someone who controlled everything. Uehara Shiroa has become too entangled. Whether with the Gotii 13, the noble families, or other forces, there are too many eyes watching him. If he were to suddenly disappear, it would draw unwanted attention to us. Besides, Aizen's voice lowered, amusement dancing at the edges of his words. This so-called strongest genius cannot be so easily defeated. He had already delved into the records of the Great Spirit Book Corridor, studying everything about the Enreikyoten. The fact that Uehara Shiroa had targeted it only confirmed one thing. The man had begun to realize his own weaknesses. Perhaps, he even intended to use Enreikyoten as a means to counter Kyoka Suigetsu. How amusing. It was clear that Uehara Shiroa still lacked a true understanding of both Shinigami abilities and their limitations. After all, he was still under 100 years old, his foundation was shallow. Aizen knew his limits. And now, he had already devised multiple strategies to eliminate Uehara Shiroa when the time came. Ikemaru Jin narrowed his eyes, his voice turning casual once again. In that case, a small smirk tugged at his lips. Why don't we target his weakness instead? His words were calculated, a deliberate test of Aizen's reaction. It's said that the commander is particularly close with the vice-captain of the 10th Division.
Aizen's smile widened. Jin, you're quite cold-blooded. He chuckled.
I recall that Vice Captain Matsumoto is your childhood friend.
His gaze sharpened. And Uehara Shiroa, your former classmate. Tozen frowned slightly at the suggestion, though he chose to remain silent. Jin, however, met Aizen's gaze with calm detachment.
Lord Aizen, he said smoothly, his tone void of hesitation.
I am a snake. Cold-blooded. Emotionless.
My only purpose is to lock onto my prey, and devour it whole. He closed his eyes briefly before reopening them. Though I do not wish to fight them, if they stand in your way, then they are my prey. And prey must die.
Aizen's approval was immediate. Well said, Jin. But then,
his expression darkened.
However, reckless actions will only provoke him. That would be inefficient. Ikemaro Jin exhaled softly. I understand. Aizen's voice became commanding. For now, our priority is Hueco Mundo. We must fully conquer it. Soon. Soul Society will be ours.
Yes, Lord Aizen, both Tozen and Jin responded in unison. Inside the tea room of the 13th Division's barracks, the scent of freshly brewed tea wafted through the air. Seated at a low table, Kayaraka Shunsui lazily stared at the steaming cup before him, his expression unimpressed. With a sigh, he reached into his sleeve, pulling out his signature wine gourd. Uncorking it, he took a slow, deliberate sip before exhaling contentedly. Jushiro, he said, glancing at the white-haired captain across from him, your tea-making skills are certainly impressive. He tilted his gourd slightly. But I'm afraid they're wasted on me. His smirk deepened. The fine wine I got from the old man in the mountains suits my taste far better. You could take Jushiro, seated across from him, chuckled lightly. Despite his pale complexion, a trace of warmth returned to his eyes as he listened to his old friend's familiar antics. Shunsui, Yukitake said, shaking his head, you better hope our teacher doesn't hear that or you'll be in for a lecture. Kayarako grinned, unfazed. Ah, he won't mind, he drawled. The old man knows me too well. Yukitake's smile lingered for a moment before fading slightly. Lately, his mood had been weighed down by the issue surrounding Jinjo Kogo, a matter that had left a bitter taste in his mouth. However, sitting here, sharing a drink with an old friend, his burden felt a little lighter. Still, he couldn't help but notice something odd about Kayarako's demeanor. You seem to be in a rather good mood, Yukitake observed. Are you finally caught up with your duties? Kayarako let out a melodramatic sigh. I've come to terms with the fact that official duties are never-ending, he admitted. Then, his smirk returned. But that's not why I'm in a good mood today. He leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly, as if sharing a juicy piece of gossip. The sacred artifact of the Tsunayoshiro family was stolen. Yukitake blinked. Kayaraku chuckled. They've been running around in circles trying to find the thief. Kayarako had always been at odds with the Tsunayoshiro family. It wasn't just a matter of principle. No, his hatred for them was deeply personal. Long ago, this disgusting noble family had coveted the sacred artifact of the Ise family. Their relentless coercion had led to countless tragedies, shaping the history of Soul Society in ways most would never understand. And now, they had grown even more arrogant, throwing their weight around, persecuting smaller noble families like predatory beasts. So yes, hearing that they had lost something precious? It was incredibly satisfying. Did they catch the thief? Yukitake asked, his brows furrowing slightly. Despite his disapproval of the Tsunayoshiro family, he was not one to gloat over misfortune. Rather, the idea of a mysterious thief capable of infiltrating one of the 5 great noble families was deeply unsettling. If someone like that existed, what else were they capable of stealing? Kayarako sighed, running a hand through his hair. No, not yet, he admitted. This thief is something else entirely. He leaned back, gazing at the ceiling in thought. After all, escaping from the 5 great noble families unscathed? That's no small feat. He wasn't exaggerating. Even though the five noble families had declined over the years, they still possessed powerful hidden trump cards.
The Shihoin family's divine artifacts. The Shiba family's secret techniques.
The Tsunoyoshiro family's lost relics.
Each of them guarded things that were far from ordinary. And yet,
this mysterious thief had slipped through their fingers like a shadow in the night.
Who could it be? Yukitake and Kayaraku discussed possible suspects, but the truth was,
they had too few clues.
Yukitake believed it must have been an inside job, orchestrated by one of the noble families.
After all, only a noble would have the information and resources needed to pull off such a heist.
Kayaraku, however, had a different theory.
The thief might even be from the Tsunoyoshiro family itself, he mused.
But in the end,
they reached no definitive answer.
The only thing that was certain,
the legend of a mysterious thief was beginning to spread through Seoul society like wildfire.
Meanwhile, Urahara's store, Karakura Town.
Inside the dimly lit shop, Urahara Kisuke sat deep in thought, his fan tapping lightly against his chin.
A mysterious thief, huh?
His lips curled into an amused smile.
How interesting.
Beside him, a figure lounged carelessly, lazily munching on a rice cracker.
Shihoin Yoruchi.
You're thinking too much, Urahara, she said between bites.
If that guy already went after the Tsunoyoshiro family, that means he's on our side.
She leaned back, resting her hands behind her head.
Relax. No way someone like that would be an enemy.
To Yoruchi, anyone who targeted the Tsunoyoshiro family was automatically a good person.
Simple as that. Besides, she had a deep connection with Uehara Shiroha.
They had history.
They were comrades.
She trusted him.
Urahara raised an eyebrow. That's funny, he teased. I remember you being the most hostile toward Uehara Shiroha not too long ago.
Yoruchi rolled her eyes, tossing another rice cracker into her mouth. People change, she muttered.
Urahara chuckled, then waved his fan with a dramatic sigh.
Well, I'm not worried about him working with Aizen. He leaned forward, his expression growing more serious.
As for whether or not he's an enemy,
his eyes gleamed beneath the shadow of his hat.
Let's just say, we're not qualified to be his enemies.
Urahara Kisuke had helped Uehara Shiroha develop various special equipment. He had provided him with technology and knowledge not out of obligation, but because he understood the truth. There was no need to be concerned.
Because Uehara Shiroha was far beyond the reach of ordinary battles. His game was being played on an entirely different level. And for now,
all they could do was watch from the sidelines as the legend of the mysterious thief continued to grow. That wraps up this part of What If Transmigrated in Bleach World.
Thanks so much for listening.
As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned.
Quick reminder. What If Reborn as Gohan in future timeline is now on hold, since we've caught up with the author. So now, I need your help picking the next project for the channel. I'm currently deciding between these 3 fanfics. What if Transmigrated in One Piece and becoming a Marine?
What if Ichigo awoke his powers to save his mother?
What if Transmigrated into a nightmare mode Dragon Ball world? Please vote in the poll and let me know which story you'd like to see next. I'll take the top pick and start working on that as the series next.
Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well.
See you in the next one.